stuff about your own stuff was interesting about the voiceover stuff.
Oh yeah,
Bring
yeah. That
that
was
in.
just, I was like working at Transworld for a little while. That's actually how I got started writing. To be honest, is I think I rolled my ankle. This was in like when I was like 19 or something. I mean, I rolled my ankle many, many times, but
Yeah.
I was about 19 or something, and a friend of mine worked at Transworld. He was the art director at the time, and so I don't know how I asked like, can I do some writing or something for the magazine? And he was like, sure, go ahead, try it, and like, I never
Mm.
showed anybody my writing or anything. So I wrote this thing and I called him back in like half an hour and I was like, I got it. I'm done. And he was like, maybe you should take some more time to think
Yeah.
about it. And then, so I had my friend Scam look at it and he's the one, he's Eminem, Eminem, the rapper.
Hmm.
He has this line where he says, you have my underground stuff that I did with Scam. So that was the guy that I was hanging out with at the time.
Oh.
And he was like, he just told me to rearrange some stuff, and I was like, all right, fine. I rearranged it a little bit, and then I sent it back to my friend Ted at the time, and that was the first thing I ever got published. And then
Wow.
that kind of started my writing journey from there, and that's how people started knowing me, like in New York, to be like as a writer. And so it
Hmm.
was, I don't know what like really like what made me do that. And then I was staying at my dad's house in Corona, California. He was living out there at the time, and I was like so bored, I just could not find anything to do. There's like you needed a car. In New York, I didn't get a license till I was like 25, so
Yeah.
like in New York, you don't need a car. San Francisco, you don't need a car. But in LA, you
Right.
gotta have a car, So I
Yeah.
didn't have a
Yeah.
car and didn't have a job either. So I would be writing a lot, and so I'd send him stuff, and he would print stuff in the magazine. So
I've
it's
never
kind of
been published. I've had, I've had some of my scripts appear in somebody else's books about the shows.
yeah.
Yeah, there's something. No, wait, hold on for a second. I'm hearing some strange noises, but you don't hear them, right?
Mm-mm.
It's like
But
static or something in my line, but you're okay. All
yeah.
right. All right. So what have you seen lately on television?
Well, I was watching right before we did the podcast. I was catching up on some Rick and Morty, so that was
Mm,
pretty cool. Have you seen Rick and Morty at all? Or?
I have seen it. My daughter loves it, so I've watched it with her.
Yeah,
Um, some of it I like a lot, some of it I don't like so much. It's not as traditional as I usually like. I
yeah,
like it more grounded stories, and it's little over the top in terms of reality, but it's really well written and
yeah.
it's funny.
There was
So
one of my favorite episodes is it's about a guy who writes a script in the episode, and they have some, they go on these adventures. That's like the premise of the show. But Dan Harmon, he's the
right,
same
right,
guy
right,
who
right.
created Community.
Uh
Did you ever
huh.
seen Community? It took me
Oh,
a while to
sure.
get to that show, but I
Yeah.
actually ended up watching it, and it was really good. But you probably would really appreciate it. There's an episode where they have to go to this lighthouse, and I don't know all the details, so I'm not really spoiling it for anyone. But to get to the lighthouse, Morty is the doc. He's like the Doc Brown kind of character,
Yeah.
um, and no, Rick is the Doc Brown character, and Morty is the little kid. He's kind of like the Marty McFly kind of kid. Anyway, so Rick goes up to the lighthouse, but the guy who stays in the lighthouse, he only lets them up if one of them will listen to his latest draft of the screenplay. And so
Mm,
Morty's got to sit there, and of course he's just like, this is the worst thing ever, and he's like,
mm.
of course he's like fade in, he starts on page one, and just goes all the way through the podcast. So that one I thought was that one kind of hit home. I was like, that was pretty
Oh.
funny. Yeah. But yeah, other than that, like the Rick and Morty is pretty, like you said, it's pretty out there. It's definitely like Adult Swim and pretty zany, pretty wild. And then Community was definitely like a little bit more grounded, but still had that kind of like unusual storytelling kind of stuff, and also very self-referential and very like pop culture 80s, child of the 80s type of like references a lot. But and then I know that Dan Harmon actually he's going to be doing a new show. I'm pretty sure it's with Netflix, but they're going to be doing a new show that's based off of NFTs. You heard of NFTs lately? It's like this like kind of art thing that's going on the in the digital realm.
Oh yeah. Uh huh.
I don't know too much about it. I know a lot of the 3D people that I follow, they're working on NFTs, but yeah, that's going to be kind of interesting. It's kind of like a spin-off from Rick and Morty. I think it's going to be its own show, but it's, from the same, I guess, brainchild or whatever from, Dan Harmon. So
Yeah,
that's pretty interesting.
a lot of people will follow writers more than they used to. That
Yeah.
like he got a lot of publicity for some of his work, so there
Yeah.
are people who will see his name and then will come to it, even if it's not a direct spin-off of one of the characters from the show.
Have you seen like so that's like a real change in terms of like from when you first started till now. It's like the writers used to be completely unknown, right? Like pretty much.
Yeah, the writers were pretty well hidden in the background. Yeah, so
Except for like
uh,
maybe more people in the business, they understand, but like the
people
general
in business knew.
audience.
Yeah, general audience did not tune into shows because of the writers, though sometimes the shows would be promoted as from the creators of Cheers.
Right,
They
right.
wouldn't even put in the names necessarily because nobody recognized the names,
Oh, interesting.
but they would say from the creators of Cheers or the creators of Taxi or the creators of whatever, and it advertised it that way. So
Wow, that's pretty. It's
yeah,
got to be kind of interesting, and I know Comic Con has a lot to do with that, and like the which is great as a writer. People having appreciation for the mind and that created the things that's happening on the screen. Like that's
yeah.
usually the director gets all the credit, at least in film. Most people.
Well, in
So
film, yeah, in film, the director gets all the credit, and probably rightly so because uh, not all the he shouldn't get all the credit. I mean, the director really runs the the actual shooting of it, but in television, it's all the shooting. The director's just hired
mhm.
by the showrunner. The showrunner's, we've talked about this before. I believe that the showrunner is a writer. Used to call him the head writer. Now they call him the showrunner, and he or she um, does all things a director would do on a movie:
Mhm.
casting, uh, giving notes about how well the performances are going, and what do you want to see in the performances, and telling the director what to do. Oh well, you got to bring this up, you got to bring that down, you got to. So in television, it has become the medium of writers, where in the movie business it's still the medium of directors.
Right. Yeah.
Some writers are big enough that their names get kind of known, but usually in the film business, you're there for the actors and the director, and the writers just don't get much attention. And I
And
don't even know if they, yeah, I'm not sure what writers do much. I've done a few films, but um, my experience with the film business is that it doesn't seem to be as well disciplined in my experience as the TV business, because in the TV business we have to turn things out every week,
mhm,
one week
mhm.
after another. So that's why they went with the writers, because the writers can change things and rewrite things and keep the next scripts coming, and whatever has to come up and what has to be developed at the time, what has to be worked on in post production. And they just found it works better when the writers in control of TV. But in the film business, where they have a schedule for their shooting schedule, during that period, they're only doing one project. They're only having to focus on that one film, that one
Mhm.
story, and so it probably works better with the director in that case, because
And
there's very little rewriting, except for, I mean, once it goes in production,
right.
pre-production, there's a lot of rewriting.
And in
So
your experience, because you've done both, what's the control level of, like when you're on, and you mentioned this before about being on TV, even that's where the behind the reel came from, is that you only get to a certain place on the set or whatever, when things are about to start being produced and shot and all that kind of stuff. And you let the director handle, the interactions with the actors and everything for the most part, right? Which is a little bit different than film because you don't really interact in the same way.
yeah, in film, the writer is just an invited person who only s- only speaks
He
when
gets the
when
show.
asked to speak. But in the
It's hilarious.
so with the TV business, as I said, the showrunner is the top man or
Hmm.
top woman,
Yeah.
and uh, and everybody answers to that person. So when they say actors to the rail, the showrunner and the showrunner staff speaking through the showrunners, the showrunner speaks directly to the actors and bypasses the director entirely.
Hmm.
Uh, and the director's there, and sometimes the note is to the director because it's about a shooting, it's an angle, or it's a setup, or it's a two shot that maybe should be in singles or whatever.
Oh, okay.
And, so then you talk to the director, but it's clearly the person in charge is a showrunner, and the showrunner is talking directly to the cast. Now, when you're on stage, usually a good showrunner will talk to the director and let the director give the notes to the actors.
Hmm.
But when you do the actors to the rail, usually just before you're ready to shoot. It's usually actors to the rail is not done during just a regular run through. It's done through a run through where we're almost ready to shoot. It's on the day
Hmm.
where we're gonna have a live audience in, and there's no time for politically correct,
Hmm.
going through the director because the director is running the stage. So that's when you do, actors to the rail, and you talk directly to the actors. You just tell the actors what you want, and at that point, it doesn't matter what the director had said. You can override that
Hmm.
because you're in charge of the show. If the show fails, the showrunner is the one who gets the heat, and if it succeeds, the actors get the credit.
That's the way it should be. And then when
Yeah.
it's in a film, you're just thankful to be included at all, right?
Yeah, they don't even invite you to the set sometimes. When I did the first Beverly Hills Cop, and they asked us to come to the set because they thought they need some rewriting as we were going along.
Hmm.
But the way it turned out is Eddie Murphy liked to improvise and didn't like to memorize lines very much, at least for that film. I don't know how he works in other films.
Hmm.
And
Probably to keep some spontaneity or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it turned out it wasn't very useful for us being on the stage because Eddie wanted to do all his own rewriting.
Hmm.
We rewrote the script that went to the stage. That was our version of an earlier version that somebody else had written. We wrote, Sam Simon and I worked on that together.
Hmm.
We made the comedy version of what was just a drama with some humorous um, attitude,
Hmm.
and we made it into a comedy. And then when Eddie got it, since he didn't like to memorize the lines, and he would kind of make up stuff as he went along as well, uh, Sam and I just said, we're not coming to the set anymore. We don't want to waste our days standing here doing nothing. So
Hmm.
we left, and we never came back. We
Hmm.
never, but we chose not to be. They didn't ask us to leave, but they never really asked us to rewrite anything either. So we were just wasting our time being there.
And were you just kind of like hanging out on the set, like nobody, just taking advantage
Yeah,
of
people
craft
are saying,
services and
yeah, who are these guys? Who are these guys over there eating all the craft services food?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's an
Oh
odd
yeah.
thing, with feature films because so many people get the credit and then like, I have a limited experience, but like, I've had like a director just say, well, can't you just write the dialogue? Because I'm writing the screen direction. I'm trying to discuss with him like how the
Right,
story
right.
arc is going to happen, what the characters are going to be going through. And he was like, oh, can't you just write the dialogue? And I was like, it's not, I don't just give you sheets of dialogue and then you figure out all this other stuff. That's not how the screenwriting process works. And then and the feature, one of the features that I wrote that I was working on, um, yeah, it was like even at the reading, it was kind of like, they introduce everybody around the table and then they're like, and this is the writer, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
it's an
like
afterthought. Yeah.
this guy's just here to like take notation or something, because it was a very odd thing. And I know that
No,
they,
that is true. The features treat a writer like just another person on the film.
yeah.
No particular weight. And it's just so dramatically different when you get on a television set. The It all focuses through the writer. So the writer leads the table reading, and
Mhm.
then turns it over to the director to read the stage directions and the actors to do the lines. But whenever they have a question, they direct it toward the writer.
I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way because feature films are usually, very photographic and visual, and the sets are not stationary, or it's not a week in week out set. So once that all that art direction stuff has been decided on for a TV show, that stuff is already taken care of. So really it is about what the characters are kind of going through. So it makes more sense, I think, in that respect, to have the writers be so influential. But it is a bit odd to just relinquish the writing and then be completely removed from it, as if like your input's not that important anymore because somebody wants to shoot a bridge and like light it up from the back or whatever and make it very cinematic. It's a poor example, but it does still have a lot to do with the writing and the way the characters are developing, and that's maybe sometimes why films are so formulaic, and then you end up not feeling satisfied after watching it.
Yeah. Well, they're very different. Each medium is very different.
Hmm.
TV moves faster.
Hmm.
In comedies, there used to be fewer sets, but now most of the comedies are single camera, so there's a lot of sets.
Right, that's a good
So
point.
it
Yeah.
shoots like a film. It's just they want the writer to be in charge because we have to shoot so many per year, season, and there's always something in development, scripts being developed as well as the ones being shot or in post production, and the one being shot. They need continuity there, and
Hmm.
with a director just focuses on one thing and then gets it done, um, and then it's over. And so it's a different process because a one shot standalone a movie is a one shot standalone. I know they do sequels, but primarily the movie
Hmm.
is a standalone.
Hmm.
And television is just this huge uh, kind of serialized process where everything's connected and it goes on and on and on.
Hmm.
It can run on for 12 years, like Cheers did, ran for 12 years, and The Simpsons did run over 30 years.
Hmm.
So
That's
there's
maybe another thing too, right? Is because you have to see, not you have to really keep track of how this character is moving throughout the story. So if you're on episode 6 or something of season 5 or what have you, you have to know the backlog. You have to at least have a good idea of what the character's been through and where the
absolutely
character is going for this season arc. So that's a completely
right.
different
And
understanding.
the directors don't keep track of that unless they're a dedicated director dedicated to the show. But
Mhm.
more often, you bring different directors in for different episodes.
Yeah, that's
And
what I was
so
gonna ask.
the continuity is with the writing staff, and they're
Hmm.
there, and they know what's been shot, what will be shot, how the characters are developing, uh, what the character would say or not say. Where a director of a one shot film, a film that's just a single process, basically one episode,
Hmm.
he the director can change the motivation or the attitude of the characters at will.
Hmm.
Couldn't do that if the director came into the middle of a season of a
Hmm.
series because the characters are established. And the director starts fooling around and changing the motivation or the attitude of the character, people at home will be thrown. Suddenly, it seems like it's a different character. So
Right.
it makes sense, and I understand why a director is in charge on a film. It makes sense.
Yeah, and a lot of films, like are kind of made in the editing room, whereas like a TV show, you're following the script. There's not a lot of leeway because of how expensive it is, and like you said, it has to be like episode after episode, so it has to
Yeah,
track. So did you find that like you would be changing? And we talked about this a little bit before, how you were running long on a particular episode and the editor had a fix and was putting in reactions and things that
yeah,
you didn't think kind of synced up with the comedy and the way the story was going, so you had to make those executive decisions to have the editing be a certain way. So y-
right.
and that.
Editors sometimes will steal scenes or steal a reaction shot. For example, they think the character didn't react strongly after a moment, and it's already in the, been shot. It's in the can, so nobody
Mhm.
wants to set up the scene again, try and shoot it for a reaction shot or one shot. Just it wouldn't make sense economically. So the editor will sometimes look for that kind of reaction somewhere else in the scene to some other moment, and then build that by putting that in the place it didn't really happen.
Hmm.
So sometimes things are out of sequence and they're limited. Where with a TV show, you can go back and reshoot something because you're using a lot of the same sets and the same actors, the same everybody. So you have to throw everything together. Next week you're shooting the same show, you're shooting
Hmm.
the same series. If you need to pick up a shot, you can pick up a shot. That the editor needs
Hmm.
easily without it costing a lot of money. So
Yeah, that's interesting too, because a feature, like once you start going into the editing process, some actors are going to go off to other projects and then they may change their look entirely or
absolutely, yeah,
lose or gain weight, all those dramatic things that actors tend to do. So they're not as accessible, they may travel over across the globe or something like that. They don't really have that where it's like, these five characters or these six characters they're locked into this show for the
right.
remainder of the season. So they need to be accessible for those kind of pickup shots and stuff like that. And that's kind of interesting too. Like you brought up last time we talked about the Tracy Ullman show, and we talked about your influence of The Simpsons and the beginning of that, and that experience. And that because I was going to ask earlier when I was talking about the Dan Harmon thing, it's not really a spinoff, and The Simpsons wasn't really. It's kind of a
Well,
spinoff,
no, the Simpsons were in fact a spinoff. We had the Simpsons on the Tracy Ullman show,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that was literally a spinoff because we took characters from our show and gave them their own show.
right.
That's the definition of a spinoff.
And have you been involved in any? You worked with the Tortellis, right? Is that
Yeah,
how did that?
Tortelli's was a spinoff of Cheers. What happened was, uh, I think, it was in an episode that I wrote
Hmm.
that Nick Tortelli showed up with his wife, Loretta,
Hmm. Hmm. The
and
blonde, yeah,
made
yeah.
made Carla nuts because
Hmm.
she was this tall, blonde, pretty
Right.
woman, and he was still
Sleazy, kind of like
this yeah,
unshaven.
Neanderthal kind of guy.
Yeah, yeah. But
And
totally remember that episode actually, where he would like
oh, you do?
breathe in
Yeah,
someone's ear or something, and that would
yeah,
like
yeah,
melt
yeah.
everyone.
Everybody, it worked on everyone. Yeah, it even worked on Diane. She tried to resist.
Right.
I think she went
Totally.
off and yeah, but because of that, when the network saw the every time that Nick and Loretta were on the show did really well, and people, I guess, when they tested it, marked them high. The dials would go up when they were on screen.
Interesting.
So the network came to Glenn and Les Charles, who created Cheers, and said, "We'd like to do a spin-off of Nick Tortelli and his wife,
Hmm.
and called whatever you want to call it, but we want it to be about Nick and Loretta Tortelli."
Hmm.
And so Glenn Les came to me, and Glenn Les knew who had written it and knew me well because I had run their shows for them for a while before I went on to do other things.
Hmm.
I never stayed with shows very long. I stayed with Taxi for its whole run, but after that, I'd stay with the show for a while, and then I get all these crazy offers to go somewhere else, and I'd always take them. I probably should have
Yeah.
stayed with the show sometimes, but I would always go with somebody'd say, "Well, whenever you say no, I don't want to do it," then they give you the moon. You say,
Hmm.
I don't want to do it, and you mean it. Then they offer you everything, and then you end up taking it, which I did. Every time I took something for the money, it would turn out to be a mistake.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Hmm.
always should have stayed with the best show. And so what happened was, they came to me and said, "Would you do the Tortellis?" And at the time, I was going to develop the Tracy Ullman show with Jim Brooks,
Hmm.
but I said, "No, I don't want to do the Tortellis." So they offered me a ton of money, and working with Glenn Les, I always enjoyed working with them. They said, "We'll work closely with you when you're doing the pilot."
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll do the pilot, but I won't do the series. Would you agree to that?"
Hmm.
And they talked to the network, and everybody agreed. Okay, you do the pilot, which defines the characters and the setting and the tone and you know the theme and all that gets defined in the pilot. So they figure, okay, if I did that, then they could get somebody to come in and do the series. So
Hmm.
I did the pilot, and the pilot just tested through the roof. The pilot scored big. Everybody saw it, laughed a lot, loved the pilot.
Hmm.
But what I had done in the pilot is I had taken Loretta, who was a one-dimensional character, and Nick Tortelli, who was also a one-dimensional character, and I gave them dimension. I gave them sides we hadn't seen. We'd only seen her as being this dumb blonde and him being
Mhm.
this gross sexual
Mhm.
creature that these
Mhm.
women for some reason would be attracted to sexually.
Mhm.
And I gave him like I made him sympathetic. I made it was a real story,
Mhm.
and it went through the roof because they still liked the characters, and now the characters had some dimension to them.
Mhm.
Um, so then I went to do the Tracy Ullman show, which is what I told them all along, and I left the Tortellas and went to do the Tracy Ullman show, and I did that pilot, and then both pilots got picked up, which is unusual. I got two shows on the air in the same season, which is really unusual.
Mhm.
Uh, for one creator to get two shows in the same season. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of creators get season after season, but I got them both in one season.
Or two in a career. I don't know. That'd be pretty amazing too. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, true too. So I had to choose between the two, and I chose to work with Jim Brooks because I had worked on Taxi first,
Mhm.
and Jim also offered me a movie, which
Mm.
Jim then had done a couple movies and had gotten Oscars for both of them. It was Terms of Endearment and Broadcast News, and he said, "We'll do a movie together if you come do the Tracy Ullman show." So
Did Terms of Endearment? That's left field for a comedy writer.
yeah, isn't that weird? But
Yeah.
he bought the book. It's
Mhm.
based on a novel, so
Mhm.
he bought the novel. He bought the novel from somebody else who'd already bought. Somebody else already bought the rights.
Mhm.
He bought those rights from that actress who bought the rights so she could star in it. And Jim bought it from her, saying that he would not promise her the role, but she would be his top choice. And then he
Mhm.
gave it to somebody else.
Mhm.
He gave Shirley MacLaine the part. I won't say who the other actress was, but he gave the part to Shirley MacLaine, which made the other actress very unhappy. But anyhow,
Mm.
Jim bought the book, and Jim's a wonderful writer. I mean, he's a genius writer. So he made the book very cinematic.
Mhm.
It was a really terrific film.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but it was more of a dramatic
Yes,
story
very
with
dramatic.
some humorous attitudes, but it was basically a drama with
Yeah, a real tearjerker that one.
humor. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to sit through. You
So,
know, it's
but
very.
it had some humor. It had a humorous attitude. Humorous. The characters had humorous attitudes. That anyhow. So Jim did a really great job of making it into a film.
Mhm.
So I wanted to work with Jim, and so Glenn L. S. Charles, who said, "You come do the Tortellis," originally before I had said I wasn't going to. I said I wouldn't go past the pilot. When it got picked up, and they both got picked up, and then both of them came back to me and said, "Well, you sure you want?" Glenn Les said you can still run this show, and Jim Brooks said, "Oh, you stay with the Tortellis, and I mean with the Tracy Ullman show. We'll pay you less money, and we'll make you work more hours for less,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
we'll do a movie with you."
That sounds alluring. Okay.
The movie part was the alluring part,
Yeah, yeah, it's all.
and at the time, and I like to bring up the money just because I think that it tells you somehow some things that influenced my decisions that maybe I shouldn't. But
Yeah.
the Fox Studios said we'll give you $600,000 for your movie up front, sight unseen.
Mhm.
It's hard to turn a $600,000 for one film for one
Yeah, I don't even
script.
think they do that anymore. I don't think they have that kind of. You
I don't
know,
know what they do,
they
that
rarely
was
buy pictures for that.
so if I came over, I'd do the Tracy Ullman show and get paid for that a lot of money, and I won't go into what that money was. It was less than I'd get at the Tortellis because I was only one of four creators, but I also have this movie for $600,000, and I
Mhm.
just chose I wanted to get in the movie business with Jim Brooks, so I went over
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
So what happened? Glenn Les Charles didn't want to run or didn't want to actively be involved in the Tortellis either, so they hired a new showrunner whose name I won't mention, but they hired a new showrunner, and that showrunner went back to the original Loretta and Nick
Mm.
one-dimensional characters, which were bigger laughs but less satisfying in
Mhm.
terms of story content and character development and character rooting for characters and caring about characters. That person decided that it was funnier when they were one-dimensional, went back to the one-dimensional characters.
Mhm.
So I watched some of them. I thought they weren't very good, frankly, and
And this is after the pilot. So the pilot has aired, and so when they're now running the show, so they get to pick the direction of how the characters are going to arc over the
yeah.
season. And so
Unless I
they're.
wanted to come back. Glenlis
Yeah.
didn't want to come back, and I didn't want to go over there. So they hired a showrunner, and then they let the showrunner do what the showrunners do, run the show.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the showrunner believed in something different than what I did in the pilot, which is what sold the series, got the series on the air,
Right.
but thought she was making a move that would be that would improve it even more. And I think she did guess wrong. She made a wrong choice, and consequently, the show got canceled after about 6 episodes. I don't
Mm,
think it ran a whole season. Maybe ran a whole season. Whatever, it got canceled. Never did well. Never got good numbers. Never got good
hmm
ratings. Never got any of the accolades that the pilot got.
hmm
Um,
And when you did the pilot, did you set up like a potential series arc or anything like that, like from the pilot, or did you have any of that stuff in mind?
it's funny in the good old days when we used to type on typewriters.
hmm
Uh,
Which is incredibly difficult, by the way. I mean,
yes, it
it's very
is.
glorious looking, but it's just like way hard to push those things in,
Oh,
those
it's
keys.
it's miserable to type on type, and then you can't instantly correct and all that stuff. It's
Right.
terrible. Computers were dramatically improved writing even because you spend more time writing and less time correcting your writing.
Right. Yeah.
Correcting your the physical
Typos and everything.
presentation of the writing.
Yeah.
So, um, so I didn't go with the Tortellis, and it got canceled because I think it was done completely wrong. Um, it only had a chance that those characters were had more than one dimension because they were the lead characters. You just can't do anyhow.
I think I
So
cut you off a little bit too, because you're about to touch on, the potential story arc or, any
oh, that's
season
right.
arc or whatever.
So what happened in the good old days? We didn't do that. We would come up with a premise for a series.
hmm
We'd tell them who the characters were and where the series was set, and we never talked about the future. We didn't say
Really?
where the yeah. We didn't say this is the character arc for the first season, second season, third season, and for the whole run of the series or 5 years at a time. However, you're going
Yeah.
to do that. There was
Yeah.
no future planning. All you did was you said, "Here are the characters. Here's the venue, the setting, the
hmm
main setting, the main arena or story world or whatever you want to call it." Um, and that was it. Then
hmm
you'd wing it from week to week. You'd write episodes, and if the characters developed, they developed in week to week. Things Something came up, and you liked to go this certain way, and you went that way, and then it changed the character a little bit, so it sent the character on a certain journey and development. But it
Right.
was all just we were just flying by the seat of our pants, just doing whatever came up.
That actually to me, it seems to make a little bit more sense and to be a little bit more appealing. I mean, I know now I've read some of your Bibles and I've read other Bibles, and people say like when you pitch a show, you want to have an idea where the show is going to be 5 years from now, and I find that to be, which is also part of my issue with writing an outline is, I typically am like the moment to moment thing is what really intrigues me with the writing.
Yeah,
So
if you
pre-planning so far in advance it makes it a little bit more tedious to me and also kind of boring, I think, but that's just my personal.
I'm not sure it's a better way. I don't know which is a better way to go, frankly.
Mhm.
But if say we made a wrong turn, say we like for example, when Glenn and Les decided it was time for Sam and Diane to get together after Sam and Diane had been flirting and not being able to get together for the longest time. Once they got together, the show didn't do as well, and
Mhm.
Glenn and Les knew that. I think it was the network who asked for them to come together because the audience wanted them to come together. I don't think Glenn and Les wanted them to come together.
So their instincts were to keep that tension,
Yeah,
consistent.
but the network thought that the public was getting a little uneasy with waiting for them to get together and wanted them to get together. Whatever. Once it came together, it just didn't work as well, and so Glenn and Les wrote it so that they had a breakup and they went through. What I'm saying is that when you were winging it, if you made a mistake, you could correct it because it's not a movie. It's not a one-time thing.
Mhm.
It's an evolving process. So if you made a mistake about a direction for a character to go, you back off of that and go back to what you had before. And so you could kind of play with how you felt about the characters and how the public felt about the characters. There was something about improvising that was really nice.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because like good, like for example, when I'm doing one draft to another, I'll write something that I think is interesting, and sometimes people pick up on that thing that I think is interesting, or sometimes they pick up on something else that they think is interesting. And then in my next draft, I can write toward that. I may not, or
Yes.
it helps me like decide like, oh, well, I can overlap that with this other thing that I thought was interesting, or just completely get rid of something that people aren't picking up on at all. And I think that's like almost like stand up, right? Like you need that audience reaction to help you kind of gauge
Yeah.
where the joke is going. And if you do it too much in a contained environment and then present it to people, they may not have ever really caught on to the first thing that you were thinking, and then it kind of fizzles, and then they're like, maybe that's, I wonder, what do you think, like, is that part of the reason why shows are just getting canceled left and right? Like, because shows get canceled now before the characters really get a chance to develop, even the actors get a chance to lean into the character. And I think that kind of does a huge disservice to the actual show, like,
Mm.
especially if there's shows that you like and they only get like 2 seasons or something.
Yeah, I think what happens is if in the show Bible, I know you were saying you read several Bibles. I want to make sure people understand we're talking about the show Bible,
Sure.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
the Holy Bibles.
Hmm.
Uh, I actually had a student one time. I said you got to write a Bible for your show, and he started taking excerpts from the New Testament. I said,
Did
no,
you
no, no,
really?
no, no. Yeah, he said, or I don't think he did yet. He said, I don't understand how I'm going to incorporate the New Testament into this
It was like so and
series.
so begat
Yeah,
so and so begat so and
yeah,
so, for
yeah.
like 10 pages or
No, no,
whatever.
no, 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 no. It's a show Bible. They could come up with a different word. I don't know why they have to call it a show Bible, but
Hmm.
the show Bible just tells everybody where the show's going to go and who the characters are, and defines everything. And it's changed so that suddenly everything's defined at the beginning of the series. And I think the networks do that so they get more control, so
Mm.
they know where it's going to go. They want to control it. They want to then give you notes right on your show Bible right away.
Hmm.
They can have their thumbprint and their effect. And the networks are very, very concerned about having control over the shows. And that's one of the reasons Taxi got canceled, because Jim Brooks would never listen to the networks on anything. He wouldn't even let them come to the set. He
Mm.
wouldn't let them see any of our outlines or he wouldn't let us tell him in advance what we were working on. The networks were just held away, totally away from the show. So eventually, even though we were still in the top ratings and still getting nominations for best series and winning,
Hmm.
they they canceled us. So they put us in a very bad time slot, so we would get canceled. So the critics couldn't say, "Hey, you can't take off the top show on television." So then they put us in a really bad time slot. Said they put us there so we would build up that slot, which was totally a lie. They
Hmm.
put us there to die, and we did die, and the show got canceled. But that
So
was
that's
because Steve
interesting.
Brooks
That's
wouldn't
like,
listen to them. Yeah,
they're more interested in having control over something rather than
they think they
having the
know
final
better, and
result be
they may
good.
know better. They think
Yeah.
everybody thinks they know best. So
Sure. Sure.
the people who are running the network think they know better than the writers or anybody, so they want to control it.
Hmm.
So everybody wants control. I mean,
Hmm.
it's human nature. So
Yeah, that's
why
true.
people run for president of the United States? They give up a big paying job as an entertainer to become president of the United States, so they get the power and the control. So
Yeah, it's interesting that it's a bunch of little dictators, running around and trying to control these different shows, and everybody. I mean, ultimately, it's not really about being a dictatorship. It's really about trying to safeguard yourself from the unknown and to have a little sense of comfort, And they are shelling out tons of money to produce these shows, and they have
right.
advertisers they have to be responsible to. I understand some of the logistic parts of it, but if
I
the show's
understand it
doing
too.
well.
Yeah, I understand it. You know what happens to you get a show like I'm gonna mention a show that actually did really well, and I used to enjoy watching Lost. Did you
Yeah,
ever watch Lost?
I tried to. I
Okay,
got
well, what
like three
happened was
seasons in, and I was like, I'm getting lost. I can't.
that's what happened because they didn't have a direction. They didn't have a
Hmm.
show Bible. They didn't know where the show was going to end, and it didn't end. I
Hmm.
believe that they ended up with some ending that was really kind of I don't know anybody who was satisfied with the way it ended. There,
That was
there
a
are a few.
kitchen sink show right there. I mean, that was
Yeah, so
everything. You know.
they would throw everything at you,
Yeah.
and I would watch it and get hooked on it because it was really they were really good writers, good
Hmm.
creators, good actors. Everybody did their job well, but they didn't know where they were going. So every week they'd invent something different, and then they invented something so crazy and outrageous. To top that, they had to come up with something even more crazy and outrageous,
Hmm.
and ultimately were headed like a runaway train, a runaway freight train. They were had all this momentum and speed, and they didn't know where they were going, and so at the end they crashed.
I
And
wonder if
it,
that's a thing with dramas, like is that something that's pretty inherent with dramas? Because you get Lost was again like once they brought in a different sea vessel and they started splitting the people off the island, and then there's a new camp, and then there's this black smoke that floats around, and John Locke's got to press the button all the time, and there's a lot happening, and they don't focus on every episode on the same characters, because they have like 12 main characters, which is
yeah,
very unusual. And then you get like like a show like even like Game of Thrones or like Walking Dead actually does a good job managing all these different storylines over this huge
um,
arc, for years to years to years, which is I like Walking Dead. It's a pretty interesting show. And I never thought I would like it because I don't really like zombie stuff. That's not a genre I'm very interested in. But they do a good job of creating suspense and building up the
yeah.
characters and everything.
Well, I'm just glad to see zombies working again. For a long time they didn't have any work.
True. Yeah. There's and so many of them too. They've really supported
Yeah,
that community very
yeah.
well.
So that's good. But no, I agree with you. I think shows like Walking Dead do better because they do create a Bible and a direction for their show, and they know
Hmm.
what it's about, where it's going, and what the theme is, and what the tone is, and all those things, and they're consistent with it. So there's arguments to be made for both. You have a show like Lost, which was a lot of fun to watch,
Hmm.
but then got too wild and crazy and seemed to nowhere to go.
Right.
But it by then it earned a lot of money for a lot of people. The network, the creators, the actors, everybody had done a really had made a good choice in going with that series, except they had no ending. So by some point, people started bailing out, and then the show eventually, as I said, I think it ran into a wall. The
Hmm.
freight train hit the wall, and then it all just blew up. And I don't really think they really came up with a real ending. But had they known where the ending was, they would have directed the stories differently toward that ending. It probably would have been better. As I said, the series was really good in the early parts because it was really imaginative. It was well written. It was well acted. Everything was good about it. But I think they made the mistake of not knowing where they were going. And I think they should. So there's pluses and minuses. I think with
Hmm.
a half-hour sitcom, it's not as important that you know where you're going.
Hmm.
It's just you just keep moving forward, and then it evolves on its own. And when you hit your last episode, sometimes you don't even know because you get canceled and you don't even do a last episode. So we didn't do a last
Yeah.
episode of Taxi. So
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And I think also they serve different functions, suspense, drama versus comedy, whereas comedy seems to have a lot of moralizing in it. There's that lesson learned for every episode, and I don't know if that's always intentional or if that's just like when you did Coach's Daughter, was that I know you had the intent to show um, a level of appreciation and love for someone's inner beauty, but it's
uh,
not really like a moral imperative that people pick up on that. So it
it
seems a
was my intention, though. No, it
yeah.
was. I did write that episode with the idea of making that clear
Hmm.
that how important it is to focus on somebody's inner beauty, and so that did work.
Hmm.
Usually, we tried to avoid that. There was an idea that was told to me when I was first starting the business: do not preach, do not
Right.
be didactic, do not teach anybody anything,
Hmm.
just entertain.
Hmm.
And I did that for the most part. Most of my episodes are just entertaining. And sometimes somebody'd say, "Oh man, that message you had in your script." And I didn't mean to put a message in the script. They
Hmm.
read the message in the script. I had somebody one time say, "Oh, that song you picked for the conclusion of that episode was perfect and it meant so much."
Hmm.
And then went on to all the details about what the meaning of the song was. And I had to say, I don't know if I was going to say it, but I finally had to say, it was the only song we could get in our budget. We really went after other songs,
Yeah.
and that was the only one by a major artist where the artist would allow us to have it for the budget we had.
Hmm.
And we didn't even choose that song. That was the song that we could get. Um, it's crazy, but that happened, and they read into it. So
Yeah, that's actually really fascinating because so much meaning can be assigned to something, and then you can read into something so much and think that that's the intent. And when I was in undergrad, I remember they were, because you write these essays on people's writing, and the thing about, and you probably experienced this too, actually, when you were in the writing program in college, is there's no definitive answer. It just seems to be like whoever can BS the most kind of gets the crown or whatever, and like if you're good at kind of, I mean, if you, I find that very fascinating. And that was one of the things that frustrated me about the writing program is there doesn't seem to be any definitive answer. And I'd have even some professors say, well, you can't trust the author's intent. They may not be aware of what their
Absolutely.
overall meaning is. Maybe it escapes them and that's more universal. And I was thinking like, no, maybe sometimes the author knows exactly what they're trying to get across and their point, and people are just kind of going out into the mist with it, and
Yeah, when I wrote, so I say Coach Star was an intention of mine to make that point. The very first script I ever wrote was called Reluctant Fighter. It was about our boxer fighting because he got a chance to box against a former champ who was making a comeback to inspire a young kid who had to have surgery and
hmm
was afraid of the surgery. And this boxer was a hero of the kids and said, if you do the surgery and you go in there with confidence, I will go back into the ring. And then
hmm
Tony beats him, which made Tony feel terrible. Um,
and then because he knows he's crushing that kid's spirits,
Yeah,
he's
and
like, oh, this
and
surgery is
also
gonna be
he's beating this guy who's a beloved champion, and,
hmm
and Tony was a bum, and a bum's beating this beloved champion. Tony didn't want to do that to the guy.
hmm
Um, it was just written for the fun of it and the funniness of that weird situation. Nobody was thinking about the morals of it.
hmm
But when I did it, I think I told you I had when Tony actually knocks the champ out and they're counting the champ out. Tony had a tear in his eye. I didn't even have Tony say, I feel so terrible. I just wanted a close enough shot where you see there was a tear in Tony's eye as they're raising his hand up above the champ that's at his feet that he didn't want to be. And
hmm
Tony had a tear in his eye, and they said, "No way, you're not doing that, kid. This is a
hmm
comedy. This is not a drama." Today they could do that, but in those days we couldn't, and they wouldn't let me do that. But my version won the Writers Guild Award. So the
hmm
Writers Guild said it was the best script written that year, but it never got shot with that. And then there would have been a lesson. The lesson would have been that winning isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is the humanity. In this case, it was a kid wanting to the kid going to have surgery, the champ doing this wonderful thing for the kid, and then Tony, a bum, knocks him out, made Tony feel so bad that he actually had tears in his eyes. To me, that was saying, you never know where this really deep humanity is going to come from.
hmm
Who would have thought that Tony and everybody was mad at Tony? They were booing Tony and all that stuff, but Tony felt worse than any of them.
hmm
But Tony didn't get any credit for that because all they saw was his bum beat their champion. But
hmm
Tony was crying, so there's a message there, and I couldn't tell you exactly what the message is. To me, it's about humanity. It's more important than victory. Winning or losing is
hmm
it's not as important as what's going on with people and their relationships. But when they rewrote my version, they made it all just funny. They made Tony was just didn't want his hand raised and said they know who won and kept pulling his hand down, which was funny.
hmm
And the kid that he was fighting for turned out to be a brat and a terrible kid. And when Tony tries to go to the kid and say, I'm sorry I beat your champ, the kid punched Tony in the mouth with brass knuckles and knocked out one of Tony's teeth. The way they wrote it, that's not the way
hmm
I wrote it. I
right
wrote it where Tony actually came to the kid and said, "Look, kid, I beat him, but it was just because he's old. He was great. He was just too old to box anymore. It had nothing to do. He was a in his prime. He was the best boxer ever." And the kid says, "Yeah, but I got nothing now." And Tony said, "Well, I'll be your champion." And the kid said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And it was a nice moment. And then Tony says, the kid says, "Well, how do you say?" He said, whatever it was, Tony almost never would. So Tony says, "Yeah, I'll be your champion." And the kid said, "Well, that's good until you lose your next fight." And Tony had to say, "Well, that could be, that'd probably be next week."
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
then the kid still said, "Well, maybe we can go beyond, when you lose your next fight." So they actually they had a connection,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and it won the Writers Guild Awards, the best script written that year. And yet when they shot it on Taxi, they said it's just too serious.
mm-hmm.
So that one did have a message when I wrote it, though I can't tell you exactly what the message is. I think we all understand from what I'm saying what the message was.
Mm-hmm.
It had no message when it was shot. It was just funny. It was Tony's boxing this guy who's the next champ who's going to come back. Tony beats him. He doesn't want his hand raised, and people are booing Tony, and Tony's saying, "Hey, uh, whatever." And then the kid knocks his punch. The kid says to Tony at one point, the kid's mumbling, and Tony says, "I can't hear you." He thinks the kid's weeping, and the kid goes like this for Tony to come in closer. Tony comes in closer. The kid's in a wheelchair. Tony comes in really close, and the kid smacks him in the mouth with ball bearings and knocks out Tony's tooth. And I guess that was funnier, but surely there was no point about humanity anymore.
Was that something though, like when you sat down to write the script, is that something that because it sounds like, from hearing you talk about it now, that even now it's kind of hard to articulate exactly what that feeling was that you were trying to, get across. And it's sometimes like that with writing where you have a feeling about something, but
Yeah.
it's still difficult to really pinpoint what it is, but um,
Yeah, I couldn't pinpoint it, but I knew it was about the importance of being a good person.
mhm,
Tony
mhm,
was a good person. He knocked out a champ who was a good person, and the kid was a good person. People say, "Yeah, it's all about good, 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 good." It's
mhm,
boring,
mhm.
but it was never boring in my version, or I wouldn't have won the Writers Guild Award for it.
So in
In
your
my
version, the
version,
kid was not a little shitbag. He was just basically like like a. It almost reminds me of like the Babe Ruth, like pointing to the stands. You know what I mean? So he could knock out
mhm.
the homer. That's where the sense
It's
that I
kind of
get.
like it's kind of like this story, and with the kid was not at all a bad kid, but was very disappointed when his champion lost and didn't want to talk to Tony. When
Hmm.
Tony came into the room and wanted to talk to him, the kid was mean, and they got a lot of jokes out of the kid being kind of seeming like a shit. And that's
Hmm.
what we were saying. Tony to all these people looked like a shit because he beat the boxer, and
Hmm.
Tony was feeling worse than anybody. So Tony was really a sweet human being who was really sorry he had beat his champ
Hmm.
and their champ.
Hmm.
The kid was really a decent kid who just was so disappointed his champ had lost and was mean to Tony. And at first it looked like he was a little shit. And then you realize the kid was just crushed.
Hmm.
And so, maybe the point was you don't read, a book by its cover. Don't judge a book by its cover. Tony looked like the 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 champ's undoing. And in fact, Tony was a really decent guy. Tony's victory actually wasn't a victory to Tony because it wasn't about winning or losing. He just he liked the idea that he was going to box with a champ. He never expected to beat him.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
It
so
also
it,
kind
it
of has
was,
elements of Rocky in there a little bit. You know?
yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
just wanted to go the distance with the champ. That's true.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes hard to say exactly what the theme is or what the moral is. It was
Right.
just about it was basically about good people being put in situations where they don't get to do the good thing.
Right.
The good thing would have been let the boxer beat Tony, but Tony is not the kind of guy who's going to throw the fight, so Tony had to beat the boxer.
And that's not a good thing either because it's like he isn't, you're testing what's the greater good. If you just let someone win and you had the ability to beat them, that's not necessarily a good thing. That,
Right.
I ultimately in the competitive world, that's definitely a faux pas. You wouldn't want to do that in a competitive world, but in only in certain circumstances would you want to let someone win. You know what I mean?
I don't think he'd ever do that. I
Yeah.
think it immediately makes the sport fake.
Right.
And you can't do that. Tony believed in boxing,
Hmm.
and Tony did not want to throw the fight.
He also wasn't a bruiser. That's the thing about him. He liked the sport, but he wasn't. He was a little bit of a meathead, but he wasn't like, you
Oh,
know,
right. Right. He
like
was,
a Tank Abbott or something like that, who just went out and wanted to destroy and didn't respect anyone, you know, and like, you know.
yeah. So that's what I think that the message was kind of when if you look at a situation, don't judge it by what looks obvious.
Hmm.
Look beyond it. The kid was more than we thought he was. Tony was more than everybody else thought he was with his um, that Tony beat the guy for all the right reasons, but the audience hated him for it. So it was the irony too.
Hmm.
It's really hard to define exactly what the lesson is. Uh, Winning is not, if I were to say winning is not as important, even for the kid, winning is not as important as the human connection. And
Hmm.
so when the kid lost his champion, when Tony said, I'll be your boxer, the kid accepted that.
Hmm.
Now he knew Tony wasn't that great, but
Yeah,
Tony was a
which is
human
funny, you know,
being.
that's what makes it
Yeah,
funny.
right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, when he
interesting.
said the kid says, "Yeah, so you'll be my boxer until you lose your next fight." Until yeah, it could be weeks.
Hmm.
Who knows? And the kid still accepted that. Well, we'll see what happens. But I guess in each case, it was like the event of winning the fight wasn't as important as Tony's reaction to beating this champion that everybody
Hmm.
loved.
Hmm.
And to the kid, it was more important that an adult who was a athlete became his hero, and then when that hero fell, that the Tony replaced him as his new hero. It's really hard. I think on really good emotional stories, it's really hard to say, here's the lesson. Now,
Hmm.
in Coach's Daughter, it was easy. The lesson was beauty is not skin deep.
Hmm.
It was so easy. It was very simple. But and I didn't win any awards for that. I didn't put it up for any awards. So I don't know. Maybe I would have won some awards because it was a
Hmm.
really good episode.
Yeah, it
But
was.
but on the Reluctant Fighter, my version won the Writers Guild Award, the best script written that season. But it didn't get shot because it wasn't funny enough, and it was too dramatic for the show runners.
It's interesting too because they went with the complete shock value, Dennis the Menace approach, you know, with the one that got shot. And as a writer, you know, then do you have to keep that continuity where the next episode he's missing a tooth, you know, forever he's missing a tooth after that
Oh,
episode?
you know what happened? Well, no, you can get a tooth replaced, and you never
Yeah, I
know.
guess that's true. Yeah, yeah.
But the truth is, what happened is I actually went to Jim Brooks and I said, Jim, this is so not what I intended. And this is my first script. I don't want to seem arrogant or cocky or anything,
Hmm.
but it really pains me to see him knock out his tooth. Can at least he not knock out the tooth? Can he punch him in the face until he has bloody lip or something?
Hmm.
I just don't want him to do permanent damage to
Hmm.
Tony, who already felt bad enough about beating the champ and all this. You don't want to see that guy that you love. He had a tear in his eye in my version, and all that stuff.
Hmm.
And you don't want to see that guy then get beat up by the kid he's trying to be sweet to.
Right.
And so Jim, in a nice moment, Jim says, "All right, we'll give you the tooth. We're going to do everything the way we want to do it, but we won't have the kid knock out Tony's tooth." So the
Hmm.
kid did punch Tony in the mouth,
Hmm.
but he didn't hit him so hard. He's still a little kid, and they played it as less violent so that it wasn't such a powerful
Hmm.
blow that Tony was really hurt.
Hmm.
Tony's feelings were hurt, but he
Hmm.
wasn't hurt.
Right.
But nobody cared about Tony's feelings because everybody was laughing at the fact that the kid punched him. And the audience did laugh at it. The audience
Hmm.
was surprised. They didn't see it coming. And they laughed when this little kid is motioning for somebody to come in like he can't speak because he's so upset and he wants to whisper to him. And so he punches him in the mouth. People
Hmm.
laughed at that, which Jim Brooks knew they would. And he was right.
Hmm.
And it was a funnier episode the way they wrote it, and that's what they wanted to do. And Jim was saying at that time, entertain, don't teach, entertain, don't teach. And they said, you're teaching and you're putting in drama, which we don't do. So they
Hmm.
wrote a funnier episode, but the writers the Writers Guild, which is composed of writers, said, but we enjoyed the first one better, basically, by giving me the award. They're saying, we liked all that drama and humanity in it. And but we never shot it. I think it would have been a really terrific episode had it gone the way I know this also I sound egotistical with all this stuff, but I think it would have been a much better episode had they shot it the way I wrote it because it had heart and it still was funny. It was funny when they raised Tony's hand, he's trying to pull his hand down, saying they
Yeah.
know who won. That was funny, but the tear in his eye told you it wasn't just I don't know. And
It's a little bit of a different play. I mean, they're actually, like when we talk about, or you've mentioned, hang the jokes on the story. So you had already given them a good foundation, and for them to pull the hand down and they knew who won. It's similar. It's not the same type of poignancy for the eye, for him to be tearing up a little bit, which hints at something deeper, like you said. But it
yeah,
does, give you a general
it
sense
does.
that like he's got some embarrassment there. He's not exactly thrilled about it, and to
But it
be a
looked like he
reluctant
was
winner is very interesting, perspective, right?
right, because it was a reluctant fighter was the title of the episode. The
Hmm.
thing is, Tony was reacting to an audience booing him and
Hmm.
the champion down there. So, like you said, it could have looked like embarrassment. They know who won. They know who won. The tear tells you it was more than embarrassment. It was really sadness over beating this man.
Hmm.
It's a great man. He was a great fighter and also a lovely man because he was doing this for this kid, but beyond his prime, where he shouldn't have put himself through that embarrassment. So Tony felt all that. That's why he had a tear in his eye. That's why I wanted the tear in his eyes. It wasn't embarrassment. It was Tony's humanity.
Hmm. And so by the time you got to the Tortellis and you could round out those characters, from being one dimensional, because they were just basically, walk on characters. They weren't really a part of the main Cheers, showcase. They didn't really have, I mean, he came back occasionally, and but like you
Yeah.
said, that episode also stands out to me because I remember, I think was it Sam or something was like, "What is it with this dude? I
Yeah.
don't get it." Because as a womanizer, he's like trying to pinpoint like exactly, what power does he have that I don't have because I know how to do this well, which is a very interesting competitive approach.
Yeah.
And I do remember that where he whispers in his ear. So at that point, when you went to the Tortellis and you were able to Tortellis and you were able to do that spin off and take that in a different direction, did they allow more at that time for you to have more, um I wouldn't really call it a dramatic sensibility, but for better, better lack, for lack of better term, you know
I have to say that Glenn and Les Charles were on my side. I think we all decided together, Glenn and Les and myself, we all said you cannot do a series today in that particular time frame with one-dimensional characters. One-dimensional characters are kind of like um, Gilligan's Island.
Hmm.
Everybody. There's the rich guy. There's the beautiful, sexy star. There's the ingenue. There,
Hmm.
and they all just were just that's all they ever were.
Hmm.
And it wasn't so much just drama; it was depth of character.
Hmm.
And I'm telling you, comedy started out just to be funny and
Hmm.
entertaining, and then people started adding depth of character and story and all this. And now it's gotten so far along that with single camera, some of these comedies don't even look like comedies. I say Atlanta, I always bring that up. Uh, it's a good show, but it is featured as a comedy, and a lot of people think it's very funny. I don't think it's very funny, though I appreciate the show
Hmm.
because it does have humanity in it. And
Hmm.
there's more and more of that in comedy now where uh, you can do all those things that you couldn't do before. It used to be you got to make people laugh. You got to entertain them and make them laugh. And that's what Jim Brooks would tell us. You got
Hmm.
to entertain them and make them laugh. Do not try and teach them anything.
But in like a Dick Van Dyke show, because he was a family man who also was a businessman, or like was a writer for a show, sometimes when you'd see them struggling as writers on in that portion of his life, they were really struggling with how to make something interesting or entertaining or funny. But there was still a little bit of depth there, or even like and it may be specific to comedy, but like My Three Sons and things like that, there's some there's some depth there, or like Leave It to Beaver, which is more of a moralistic type of show. It's not really a comedy. Thinking of those
Yeah.
shows that were before that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
type
No,
of
you're
show.
right. I hadn't thought of that. There was a period when the shows were kind of all about lessons and all about doing the right thing, and then they became funnier and
Hmm.
more um, irreverent, more just funny, entertaining.
Hmm.
Now they're shifting back to telling more stories, but they're more sophisticated stories than Leave It to Beaver. Leave It to Beaver was a very simplistic version, but it did have morals. There was always a moral for Beaver to learn something. So,
Yeah.
and even when I was doing Taxi, some of the other shows we're still doing where every episode, like Happy Days, every episode had to have a lesson. It had
Hmm.
to, it had to have a lesson.
Hmm. Oh,
So
so that was like the directive or something of
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's interesting.
The stories had to have a lesson in them. Yeah.
And it was, and yeah, because
But that's just tells you Jim Brooks, who was everybody saying was the greatest half-hour comedy writer at the time, was saying what made his stuff so much better is he wasn't forcing that lesson stuff that like Happy Days and was doing at the same time,
mhm,
and to some degree Laverne and Shirley was doing at the same time. He was doing real characters acting in real ways that were the funniest real ways,
mhm,
and he believed in entertainment and no lessons, so he was
mhm,
going further. He also told us Louis De Palma did not have a good bone in his body. That Louis De Palma was
mhm,
just pure evil,
mhm.
and don't ever write he has a heart of gold moment.
Really,
And
that's
then yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, and then he violated that. He was the first one to do that with some notes and changes he made, and where Louis had nice moments. Louis had vulnerable moments, and they were great moments because they were so unlike Louis. And as long as they didn't feel like they weren't justifiable, then they worked great. And so we did a lot of those. And Jim never came back to say, "Okay, I changed my mind." He just changed. He just did it differently, and then
Mhm.
we all fell into line with him, and that we started giving Louis great moments. He got quite a few moments where he showed some humanity, and you felt
But then
sorry
he
for.
quickly revert back, right? Because
Yes,
his character is so so concreted in that personality type.
right. But he
Yeah.
did have some good bones in his body. I don't think anybody, even bad people that you say, oh, that's a bad person.
Yeah.
Maybe they're nice to their mother, maybe they're nice to a pet or something. Everybody's nobody's so purely evil. Well, I mean, there have been purely evil people, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying that um, to say Louis would never show a moment of kindness or niceness wasn't sustainable because there's just too many wonderful opportunities where he would do something out of character, but not unreasonable, not where it seemed like we were pulling something out of left field that wasn't true to character. That it would be something that had been hidden, and we go, "Oh yeah, we understand." Like the one where he drills a hole into the women's restroom, so he watches Elaine
Could not
change
do
her
that
clothes in the
anymore.
bathroom.
Holy cow, man.
But
That's
he did
no
that,
go.
and she happened to catch him doing it,
Hmm.
and then we hate Louis for that. And then Louis tells a story about how when he was always little, the man's only 4'11". That's pretty
Hmm.
short for a man,
Hmm.
and well, it's short for even a woman
Hmm.
today. But then he tells a story about Jim would have never allowed this. Jim would have just let him deny that was looking through the hole, and even though she poked him in the eye, he was rubbing his eye, and his eye was red. So
Hmm.
she said, it was him. He would have denied it, denied it, and denied it. But eventually, he comes around and says, he tells a story about how he used to have to buy all his clothes in the junior section, the chubby juniors,
Hmm.
and it was humiliating. And kids used to make fun of him and all this stuff. And for the first time, he's wow. So he had a tough life being so short. Being
Hmm.
short can be hard in
A lot of jokes
the
at his
world.
expense.
So
And as an
anyhow,
actor, you have to, which is interesting because, you know, funny enough, I wrote in high school, I was in drama for like a little bit, and I wrote this scene, and there was a girl who was short, and like I can't remember exactly the setup, but I had a joke for her, which was like, you know, I was actually I think making fun of my stepdad, but she said, the joke was like, you're a nice person like I am tall, right? But she was a short
oh yeah,
person,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And she refused to say it because it just pointed
Oh
out
yeah.
how short it was. And I also think she was really shy, so she didn't really want a line, she just wanted to be a presence and get it over with. And but yeah, for like Chris Farley, his the primary I loved Chris Farley. I thought he was one of the funniest people when I was growing up. But if you go back now and look at his catalog, it's mostly fat jokes,
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, he knows it. He played it up. But I think, for somebody like a Danny DeVito or something like that, where you know, they're playing up the thing that probably has really caused them some strife in real life, and like for Chris
Oh yeah,
Farley,
I'm sure.
I think
I'm
it
sure he
led to
got
his
picked
drug
on.
addiction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a boy who's very small, I'm sure gets picked on by bullies all the time. And so,
Hmm.
for the first time ever, we had sympathy for Louis. We never had sympathy up till then.
Hmm.
First time we have sympathy, and he apologizes to Elaine. He says, first time he ever apologized, um, and in the end, you kind of forgave him for it. And then he does something really disgusting at the
Right.
end.
He just
It's
goes
his
right
old
back into it.
Louis, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't remember I can't remember what it was now. I think I don't remember what it is. One time he frames the guy in the cage with him, a black guy in the cage with him, and he
Hmm.
frames him for something that he did, and
Hmm.
the black guy gets fired. Louis gets
Hmm.
away with it,
Hmm.
and so Louis, that's Louis with no decency in him, and he even gets away with it. At the end, he celebrates that he pulled it off,
Hmm.
and people are still laughing because he's such an evil bad guy.
Hmm.
But it also worked when we saw him and saw vulnerability and saw maybe that's why he got to be so mean and angry, because maybe people treated him poorly when he was growing up because of his size.
Hmm.
They'll pick on you for anything. If you have any sign of weakness,
Sure. Yeah. They'll
kids
annihilate
kids
you.
can be awful and pick on you. So can adults and other people. So
It makes me think of the conversation we were having, I think, you know, in one of the earlier podcasts. I think it was probably around the time we gave people the key to happiness, but we were talking about, so they should check that out.
yeah, check that one. Yeah,
But the thing with Sam, he's only we were actually talking about the R word, which is redemption, or like the thing we don't really talk about is the character can really only be redeeming if you see them at fault a lot, and then they have a genuine moment of
yes,
clarity. If they're always great, then there's nothing redeeming about a character like that. It's
yeah,
interesting sometimes to watch a person be perfect, but it's so far-fetched, and I think,
uh-huh.
like where you have a Hans Gruber or something like that, like somebody who's an evil person, or in Hans Gruber's case, he's not really evil, he's just got a perspective that doesn't, is out of step with whatever is going on in that world, that reality. But you have characters that, like you said, no person is 100% one thing or 100% the other thing. And if we don't see them in this negative way and then see them in a positive way, the positive way doesn't have as much of an impact.
Right.
Yeah.
That's all the seasons that we obeyed Jim's directive to not give Louis a nice bone in his body paid off in that moment, because in
Hmm.
that moment when he did something nice, it was like, wow,
Hmm.
what a contrast. And then how can we believe that Louis would do something nice? And then we hear why.
Hmm.
What it meant to him, that for the first time when he knows how bad he made Elaine feel by being an object of voyeurism, which he used to have, where kids would watch him because he was little,
Hmm.
and giggle and whatever. She felt that about him watching her use the toilet, and something obviously, yeah, we'd never do
Super
that.
pervy at this point, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
He'd get
yeah,
canceled like so
absolutely.
quick right now. Yeah.
But yeah, but you're absolutely right. If you create a character who's one way and you really understand it, and then you have suddenly he does something that's totally seems out of character, except you justify it and you realize it's not out of character.
Hmm.
It's a wonderful moment. It's a
Hmm.
wonderful moment. But if he just is a guy who every week Louis is a crappy guy, crappy guy, crappy guy, and then he does something nice. If that happened every single week, it would be nothing. You just
Hmm.
know, it's just
You'd feel it coming, yeah, and it would be kind of cheap.
yeah.
And
So
that's the thing, like, with like a Walter White, or even a Tony Soprano, but Walter White's probably a little bit more in this vein where he's doing bad things, but he has a good reason. He's
mhm.
trying to protect his family for the long term because he knows he's not going to be there. Now that
They use
secret,
that a lot. Yeah.
yeah,
Like they did that with Tony Soprano. Wasn't He was just doing it for himself all
right,
from
yeah, a little bit
day one.
different.
But in Breaking Bad, he was doing it to leave some money to his family because he thought he was going to die of cancer.
Hmm.
Well, you really understand this. Shortly after that, Weeds came out, and she was doing it to take care of her family. She
Hmm.
was selling weed to take care of her family. And, she was selling to kids and all these terrible things. At least she was doing it not for her personal financial gain, but then they later on got her kind of screwed up and doing wrong things. I guess maybe the lesson is once you get involved in crime, maybe it's hard to ever turn back.
Hmm.
Um,
Or if
and
you're going to be involved in crime, do it for a greater cause, and then people will feel okay about it.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's like what's that movie with Dustin Hoffman? Is it Dustin Hoffman? It's either Dustin Hoffman or Al Pacino, where he has a lover that's transitioning or is a trans lover, and he robs a bank so that that way he can
Oh yeah, yeah. That
help
was
support him or something like
yeah.
that.
I think
Yeah.
that was that Dog Day Afternoon with
Yeah, I
it
think that
was
might have been it.
it was
Yeah.
uh was it Al Pacino? I think it was. Yeah. Um, but they've done a lot. I was thinking now. There's a couple other shows right now where there's somebody's doing bad things for another good cause. So that's kind of been overused. I can't think what it is. I was thinking of it earlier when we were talking, and then we got sidetracked and I forgot. There are a couple shows right now where somebody's doing bad stuff for good reason. Oh, um, uh, Ozark. That
Ozark, great
he's
one. That's a
doing it
great
to save
show.
his. It is, and he's
Justin
doing it.
Bateman is so good
He's
in that
doing
show.
it to protect his family, but he's doing
Hmm.
terrible things to protect
Hmm.
his family.
Right.
Um,
And then when the family gets involved, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but when they start stepping up in their way,
yeah,
each individually, and then you have one that's, one of the characters is a little bit more selfish, and I shouldn't really give away too much, but it's very fascinating, yeah, because it really not only ties them together in this horrible circumstance, but you're actually rooting for them to get
you're
away with
rooting
the
for
thing
that.
that they're going to
I
do that's
know they're going
terrible.
to do something that's going to maybe cost somebody their lives or their
Hmm.
business or whatever, or going to steal from people and do all these terrible things. They're going to help the gangsters or the not the gangsters,
The
the drug
cartel.
dealers,
Yeah.
the cartel. They're going to help them. They're going to who are selling drugs to kids and all these terrible, awful things that are going on. But if he ever stops doing it, they're going to murder his family.
Hmm.
So he's doing it to save his family. Um, I mean,
And
that's the
then
premise of the show. And without that, you would lose interest pretty quickly, I think, in this guy just doing these things for self-serving reasons.
right.
I had a problem with Sopranos.
Hmm.
Lot, it was a wonderful show, but I never understood why. Because for me, he was just doing it for himself. And though he loved his daughter, and he was good to his daughter, and he was good to his wife and to his kid,
Hmm.
I never got the sense that he had to do it to protect them or give to them. He could have gone out and gotten a job and tried to live as a normal man, but he didn't want to. He liked being a criminal. He liked that he was the head of a little crime group, crime syndicate on a small scale.
Well,
So,
interesting that you bring that up, because the thing with Tony Soprano, right, is his father was a gangster, so he looked up to his father, who was, by
that's
all
true.
measures, a little bit crazier than he was, but his
Yeah,
father was a family man. But, if talking about like Louis De Palma's backstory, for Tony Soprano's backstory, you start to empathize with his character, or at least have some sympathy, because his mother is a
I
terrible
remember.
person.
Yeah, what his mother did to
And his
him.
sister is horrible. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the way he's surrounded, you can see how he became so insular in terms of, but he still supports those people in every turn. They do something bad. But when Janice kills off the her boyfriend, and that's the guy from the Matrix. I'm terrible with names. I gotta write, know these names. I should have IMDb open or something. Anyway, when he kills off that guy because he was a bastard, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, then he still goes to like protect her, you know what I mean? Even though
Mm.
she had been horrible and very greedy and like self-serving herself, it's very fascinating.
But is that then you say again? Now you look at it. It was very psychologically stimulating show, so maybe that's why so many people liked it.
Hmm.
Because Tony, yeah, okay, Tony stands up for his sister, who's a
Hmm.
terrible person.
Hmm.
Why would you do that? Why would you love this terrible person and then stand up to protect her? Except she's your family, and
Hmm.
so it's kind of part of an extension of yourself. So
Sure.
he's still doing a very selfish thing.
Right.
He's protecting that extension of himself, which is his sister and his mother and his father and all those people who are extensions of himself.
Hmm.
So Tony was a bad guy. I mean, there's no way
Yeah.
around. I could not justify at all
Sure.
why he was doing the things he was doing. I just couldn't get there, and because I couldn't get there, and you can people who are listening to this podcast probably get the idea that I kind of write stuff that's more good people, though I
That's okay.
don't. I don't make them obviously goody good people,
Hmm.
but I don't like people who are just bad. And Tony, to me, Tony Soprano was a bad guy, and yet, uh, what's his name? Breaking Bad.
Walter White.
Yeah, Walter didn't start out being a bad guy. He got to be a bad guy,
He was a
but
doormat, and to see his
yeah,
character, that's another thing about his character that's so different than regular television is he evolved. Whereas in television, most
yes.
people don't evolve like that, not that
And,
dramatically.
and at the end, when his wife said, don't tell me now that you did this for us."
Hmm.
You remember that moment?
Hmm.
And he says, "No, I'm not, because I did it for me. I liked,
Hmm.
I was good, I was the best at something," or whatever he said. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he did admit it. By the end, that he did it for himself. In the beginning, he did it for his family,
Hmm.
but he was so good at what he did that he loved the power
Hmm.
and the success of it
And making a
and the
product
violence.
that,
He liked the violence, and he had to admit at the end he did it for himself. And
yeah, she became my least likable. I liked her the least in that whole show, the
yeah,
Skylar character. Yeah, I
mhm,
just had a hard time. Like, there's a really interesting scene where um, he tells the brother-in-law and the sister and the wife that he has cancer, and they're sitting around this table, and what the way that the writers wrote it is no one reaches out to him to comfort him. They're concerned with Skylar and like how she's taking it or whatever, but he just becomes, I don't know if it's just the framing of the shot or whatever, but you start to realize like he is more alone even in this world of people that he's supposed to have been, that love him and he's taken care of. And I guess that was the point of that particular scene is you can see why he makes more of a departure, from his nice guy doormat image. But when in his backstory, you see him just get walked on. He became a teacher
yeah,
because he got ripped off, and this other guy's a billionaire, and he's with his ex girlfriend, and like so he had it, and then his son has got cerebral palsy, and it's
yeah,
all these marks against him that are different than what he probably imagined. So it's very
yeah.
fascinating, and
But
and
he
when you
was that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like when you write an evil character, a good evil character has slices of humanity,
Yeah, that's what I was saying
throughout them.
before. It's absolutely. Tony was really good to his family, and you had to kind of go with that and appreciate that.
Hmm.
Remember the episode he takes his daughter to college and then strangles some guy with piano wire?
Hmm.
You go, I just went, I know they're saying, look how good he is to his daughter. So you can't hate him when he strangles that other guy for squealing on them.
Hmm.
Um, I couldn't get into that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I don't want to see people getting murdered who did the right thing. I mean, the guy squealed. The guy became a federal
Hmm.
witness, and so Tony kills him.
Hmm.
Well, I don't want to see my lead character killing the guy who's doing the right thing.
Hmm.
Um, and then he goes back to his daughter and he's sweet to her again, and everybody said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful?" And I can see the psychological uh, trip that you go through that could make it an interesting experience for you and you enjoy it.
Hmm.
I couldn't. I don't know why. I just couldn't do it. I could never like Tony. I just could
Hmm.
not like him enough, even as a bad guy, to want to watch him.
Hmm.
But it was different with Walter. I could watch Walter, but I didn't watch all Breaking Bad because Walter got to be too bad at some point. And then,
Hmm.
but in the beginning, he was doing bad. Then he killed those guys that in the very first episode, he kills those two guys who come to kill him, but
Hmm.
does kill him. And uh, I that all seemed fine. It was justifiable. So I don't know.
It's interesting though, the idea of good and bad and like how it plays out and like who benefits and who loses because of that, and how they intertwine and fit, and you're not all good or all bad, so that in itself adds that those contradictions that we watch as characters, those you know is
Yeah.
fascinating. it, it,
It
it
is
draws in
fascinating.
interest, it
It is
keeps your, because you
fascinating.
never know what they're going to do. They're unreliable, and that part of it's
They're
fun.
fascinating, and I find them interesting characters to watch. But when they're the lead of the show and the whole thing's about their lives, it loses me. But it was a very successful show, so I'm not telling people not to do that. But there have been more examples, I think, of that have failed than have succeeded. Like I remember the first comedy I really remember that tried to make the lead character totally bad was called Buffalo Bill. Did you ever see that?
No,
Um, and it didn't last through one season because the guy was just mean, 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 mean. All the things he did, and he was the lead, and nobody liked it. Maybe because it was a comedy.
hmm
Maybe you have to do that if it's a drama. You can do that, but
I was actually gonna think. I was gonna say Decker. Remember Decker when Ted Danson went on to do Decker? That
yeah,
was like more of a curmudgeon and such a
yeah,
departure. I can understand why after 12 years he wants to play like a different type of character, but in The Good Place, he's a little bit more like the Ted Danson character from Cheers, but he's got more depth and it's and he's conniving, which is kind of fun. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So he has a little bit of a difference there. But and Decker, I just remember thinking like he's just kind of mean. You know what I mean? And like not in a way
yeah,
that's fun. But
yeah,
when you have a character like My Name is Earl, a guy who's done all this terrible stuff to people, but he's trying to redeem himself throughout these different episodes, and he has
yeah.
like a fun personality. Jason Lee really brought that character to life.
Yeah, I
Um,
enjoyed that series for that reason. He was a bad guy,
mhm,
and even when he's doing good things, he did them kind of begrudgingly. He was doing it so he could improve his karma. So he
right.
was doing it for a selfish reason,
Yeah.
but he was still doing good things, even for a selfish reason. Now here's a guy who's doing selfish bad. He's doing a bad thing that has good results. So
Right.
God, there's so many. If as a writer and as those of you who are listening, there are a lot of versions of you. But anytime you make something absolute, I think you're going to have a short run. I think
hmm
you got to have it kind of complex. And Tony Soprano was complex. That's why it worked. If he'd just been this guy who did all these wrong things, it wouldn't. It was the good things he did for his family that kept that show alive, and the fact that he was going to a psychiatrist and
hmm
talking about the things he was doing and all that. There are a lot of. It was good writing. It was good characters. It had a lot of working for it, but I just didn't like the lead character, so I didn't want to watch the show.
hmm Yeah, it is fascinating. And so like you were saying with the Tortelli spinoff, you gave them dimension, and then whoever took over brought it back into that one
Yeah,
dimensionality, and the show didn't last a full season.
right. They went back
So
to um, Nick being just a jerk, just a jerk. Everything he did was wrong and bad. And I tried to have him do some right things, and they turned out bad in
hmm
in the pilot. And then a bad thing he did turned out good. So I was playing with all those things. I know you don't want to just go one dimensional, and you also don't want to go directly to your from point A to point Z without a lot of detours and tangential changes and twists and turns. So you got to keep your audience interested. And if you just
hmm
have a good guy being good, 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 that's boring.
yeah, that's certainly boring.
And I might like the character, but I won't want to watch that show either because it's just not going to engage me.
And same with being bad, 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 bad.
Yeah, you're just not going to engage me.
Like that new
And
show
Tony
Lucifer.
had enough stuff. Tony Soprano was an interesting character. I just didn't, and you say, well, I'm going to lose some of my podcast listeners because they say, oh, you didn't like Tony Soprano, you didn't like The Sopranos. That was a great show. I acknowledge it was a great show. And if you wrote that show, I would appreciate it, appreciate your talent and say,
hmm
wow, good going. You really figured out how to get to your audience.
Yeah,
So, but it doesn't mean we're all going to like the same shows,
sure,
the
of
same
course not.
movies, the same anything.
Yeah.
Tony Soprano made was a really interesting character, well written, well defined. All this stuff worked so great. I just could not get in there. It just made me feel bad. And I didn't want to feel bad. That's probably why I write comedy. I want
hmm
to end an episode feeling good.
hmm I remember Keith saying that to me one time because like that uh Aaron Aronofsky, the guy who wrote Requiem for a Dream, and he's the director of Requiem for a Dream and The Wrestler and Pie, and all of his movies end on such a bad note, which is a very artsy thing to do. You know what I mean? Like a very film school type of. And I remember Keats was just like, "What do you want the audience to like walk away feeling bad?" I didn't really think
Yeah.
too much about the responsibility of how the audience feels after the show.
There
You
was a
know.
time, I think it was in the 60s when all the films ended with tragedies. They
Hmm.
all were tragic. And I go to a movie and it would end so tragic. I walk, I feel so bad and think, well, why do I want to why do I want to pay whatever now it was $18 for a movie?
Hmm.
And by the time you park and pay for your
It's like 50
tax and
bucks.
everything, yeah.
Holy
And you're
cow.
going, and then you walk out going, man, I feel so bad for that guy. And you're going,
Mhm.
you want to walk out going,
Yeah. When I used to leave,
not really, but
yeah,
what I mean. You want to walk out saying, "Wow, I just feel good. Let's go get some ice cream." With
yeah,
those, with some of the ones in the '60s in particular, you'd walk out and say, "I just want to go home. Go
hmm,
home. I don't want. I just need to be alone."
yeah. I mean, they had that, like, they were trying to do the rejection of the classic Hollywood,
Yes,
wrap
that's what
up.
they were doing.
You
That's
know.
what they're doing. I remember there was one electric. I can't remember what it was. There was one about a motorcycle cop, and he went through so many struggles to be a good guy, and he really wasn't so good, but he did the right things, and he struggled and struggled and struggled, and he did the right things, and he was a good cop at the end. And he starting to give a guy a ticket, and the guy's saying, "Oh, I'm really broke and all this," and he says, "Okay, forget about it. I'm gonna let you go." And the guy drives off,
Hmm.
and our hero realizes he still has his driver's license. So he starts following him in his motorcycle and putting on his lights again to get the guy to stop so he can give him his driver's license.
Hmm.
And instead, this is how the movie ends. Instead, the back window rolls down. It was a van. So either the door opens up or it rolls down, and a shotgun sticks out before you and instantly blows his chest wide open, and he falls off the motorcycle and he tumbles and the motorcycle tumbles. I don't know how they did that.
Hmm.
It was great special effect or
Yeah.
effects. And then they end with him lying in the middle of the street. He stops rolling. Yeah, he finally starts tumbling, and when he finally stops tumbling, he's in kind of a sitting position with his head down and his chest is just blown out, and that's how the movie ended. And oh my god,
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I hated that movie.
Yeah.
I walked out going, I know none of that was real. At least there's that. It wasn't based on a real story. Those are sometimes when I go to the ones that are based on real stories and end tragic. Those are really hard to deal with. I
Yeah.
usually end with a tragic movie and say, okay, it's just fiction. Put it out of your head. But I don't want to say it's just fiction. Put it out of my head. I want to say, hey, I really like that. I want to think about it a lot.
Hmm.
Like, you don't want to walk in a movie and I want to stop thinking about that movie. I don't want to deal with that movie. But there are other people who would say that's great. It had a huge effect on your audience. But
But it's like, is it the right effect? Like Lauren Michaels talks about in his book, like, yeah, he said a joke, but was it the right joke? Was it yeah, he got, what he says is, yeah, he got a laugh, but was it the right laugh? Like
yeah,
differentiating between these different tiers of, like, gutter humor versus high comedy, like, yeah, you'll get a reaction, you know what I mean? But is it the right reaction? And in some cases, it just depends. It's good that we have a mix, because if everything follows one specific thing, you don't have anything to measure it against. So you don't
right,
really,
right.
you
If
know,
every movie ended with a happy ending, after a while, you'd just know where the movie's going to go.
yeah.
It's going to go somewhere where everybody kind of knows where it's going because it's going to
Hmm.
end with a happy ending. All sitcoms end with a happy
Sure.
endings.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to at least to not give them the happy ending they thought they were going to get. So if
Right.
you're not going to go with a happy ending, or it doesn't have to be happy, but just an uplifting or an amusing, funny, something that when they walk away from it, they're feeling good.
Hmm.
Just don't let it be the one that they're probably guessing it's going to be. So then it's an element of surprise still. So you still give them an element of surprise, but it's kind of like writing a sonnet or a haiku. You know exactly what is required of it, what the rhythms are, how many lines and such like that. It's up to you to not let your audience predict where you're going. But except when you're done, I think it was Bob Keith should say this. When it's done, they should say that was the inevitable ending, but I didn't see it coming.
Right. Yeah,
If
totally.
you can get to that, it doesn't matter if they knew it was going to be a happy ending, as long as they think the one you come up with was the inevitable ending that they didn't see,
Yeah. Give them what
then
they're
they
expecting, but in
appreciate
an
that.
unexpected way.
Yeah, people love to be surprised. I don't know
Yeah.
why that is either, but that's a basic element of comedy. People love surprises.
And that's, interesting because the kid punching Tony in the mouth and, at the time knocking his tooth out or punching him at all and being a little Dennis the Menace kind of bastard kind of kid, that's an element of surprise. You know what I mean? So I could see like why that would make someone laugh because it's unexpected, especially probably at that
Right.
time. But,
Mm.
it's a diversion from, or it's a differentiation from the story that you had created. You know what I mean? And so it's very fascinating. I mean, in this whole conversation, like talking about the pleasure of watching a good character do something bad or a bad character do something good or a bad character doing
Yeah.
something bad that has a good outcome. You know what I mean? Like that, all that kind of stuff really makes the writing and the journey of watching something much more fascinating, like,
Fascination is the important thing. Jim used to always say, just you're supposed to entertain the audience. You're not supposed
hmm
to teach them.
hmm
You're supposed to entertain them. Those are what you do as a writer during the course of telling your story. If you know it's going to go, it's going to end with kind of Hollywood happy ending. The boy is going to get the girl. They broke up.
hmm
In those typical movies, they meet, they hate each other, they like each other, then they still break up, and then at the end they get back together.
hmm
If you do it and it's just those things, then people are going to walk away. It's boring.
hmm
But if along the way the characters are really interesting and they're fascinating, or it is a bad guy who does a good thing, like um, As Good as It Gets. Remember,
hmm
Jack Nicholson was this awful
yeah,
person.
yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah, he was an awful guy. He puts a dog in a dumpster trap in a dump chute, drops him down to go down into the trash to get thrown away in the
hmm
how can how can you redeem a character like that? But he did, and it had a happy ending.
hmm
But he got to the happy ending by having such a terrible person go through such a huge transformation by the end he was as good as that person could be. I think that's what it's called, as good as it gets, right?
But he's also measured against the Greg Kinnear character, who's a very happy person. Like not a happy person. He's a very likable person,
Yeah,
right? In the comparison to being unlikable. And
yeah,
you like the Greg Kinnear character so much that when he goes out of his way for this guy that he actually just finds as kind of like a burr in his shoe, he's just annoyed by him, but he's like, all right, I'm gonna help him anyway. Then it makes sense as to why, like, that's the way to redeem people, redeem characters, redeem
yeah.
a sense of humanity out of people.
And so that's one of the things you can do. Take your character, make your character really unlikable, and then
hmm
by the end, make the audience root for him and love him.
Which is
That's
a
a great
challenge.
trip. That's a
That's a
great
very
trip to be able to do that. Another thing
exactly.
is to take a character and go the other way, make the character turn into a villain at the end. If it
hmm
ends on a funny villainous thing, and that person gets his comeuppance or doesn't or whatever, it's just entertainment. Writing. I always say this: you have the universe, you have everything to pull from. Just keep it engaging. Keep your
hmm
story engaging. It doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to end with a dark note like a guy getting shot in the chest and ending up rolling and ending up lying. Like it's like,
yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to end there just because you don't want to have a happy ending. You could have had a decent ending, and he could have gone through other kinds of trauma. I don't know what, but I would spend a lot of time thinking that through and not just say, well, I know how to get shock ending. We'll take our guy that we all now decided we love and have at the least likely moment,
hmm
just murder him senselessly.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, let's do that, man. That'll be good. That'll catch everybody off guard.
yeah. The and it also makes it seem like it's an like if you have a character that's one dimensional or just evil, then it's an unmotivated evilness. You know what I mean? If you can in your backstory build in a little bit of knowledge for the audience to understand why they may be like that, like the Louis De
No,
Palma type of way, then you at least can be brought on that journey a little bit more.
yeah,
Whereas if they're just one dimensionally good or one dimensionally bad, then they're kind of annoying. They're just kind of an
yeah,
annoying personality, and it's easy to write off somebody like that. But somebody who has that complexity and that contradiction, and you don't know if they're going to do something good or bad in that moment that you expect them to. And that's a good way to set it up too. Like you give them certain moments to where in one moment you give them the opportunity to do something good and they do something selfish, and then
yeah,
you set up another similar moment or something that here's another moment where they have the option to either act good or not good, but like selfish or self-involved, and then they do something, they go left field, and take
Yeah.
a turn and do something selfless, then that makes for an interesting watch because you just never know what's going to happen with that character. People don't really like a certain amount of predictability. They do, but they don't.
Yes, they don't want predictability because it's boring.
Yeah.
It's true. That's why you don't want to lecture people in your stories, or get too heavy-handed in your exposition and stuff. People don't want to be bored, and what keeps them from being bored? People have an attention span. I read somewhere that people can focus on one thing for about 8 seconds
Hmm.
before their mind starts to wander. So
Hmm.
every 8 seconds, you got to pull them back in. How do you pull them back in? You surprise them. You make character do what you don't expect, or you have something external happen that you didn't expect. It's your job as a writer to keep that person engaged for 2 hours in a movie, and for a half hour comedy for a half hour. And you don't do that by just having a straight line. People will
Hmm.
get bored after 8 seconds, and after 20 seconds they're gone.
Hmm. It makes me think too, like, not only is it like more interesting for the entertainment value of like an audience, it's actually a more entertaining bit to write. You have a journey to go on with, you get to discover like, oh, this character does this now. And and I know we could talk about the Robert McKee idea of like writing all these elaborate backstories, but to me, I just find that um a certain amount of backstory is cool, but again, too much information, then it's like you're just writing, you're a genealogist at a certain point, and you're not really writing about this particular character. And I like to kind of discover things as I go along. But it made me think, when we were talking about this a little bit ago, is these characters that are one dimensional. You've seen Carrie, right? The movie.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So in the first version, I was a reader for a Flynn Picture Company for a little while, and across the desk came a remake of Carrie. And I remember reading it, and I went to the story editor at the time that was working there, Allison, and I was telling her like, I don't think this is actually, the remake is a good picture. There's nothing different about it from the first one that really draws you in. And now the audiences are a little bit more mature, and they made the remake. They didn't make the remake. I think they passed on it, but it did get made, and it
It
just
didn't do well.
did not do well. You know what I mean?
No.
And I was happy that, I remember when I was there, I was telling Keats, like, it just seems like I should just say no to a lot of this stuff. And he's like, absolutely, say no. The first thing you should do is say no to a story. And don't like say yes. And because they're judging your um, story critique ability based on what you get excited about, And so, and I was happy I said no to that one because it didn't do well. Not because I was rooting for it to not do well. It just didn't have the depth that even the first one had, which is
Yeah.
this woman coming, a young girl coming into her own. This is how I read it. The metaphor of the whole story is a woman coming into, or a woman, I keep saying that, a girl coming into her own womanhood, and that being in juxtaposition to the religious aspect and her sexuality, and that being in juxtaposition to the religious um, perspective that the mother had, and didn't want her, not to, not just to, she didn't want her exploring that type of sexuality at that age because she didn't want to ruin her as a woman. That's the first version. The second one just kind of was more heavy handed on the unyieldingness of the religious personification of the
Mm.
mother character, and it didn't play the same.
Yeah.
And in fact,
Yeah.
like, if you've ever read Cujo, which another thing that came across the desk is, Cujo to me seemed like, the original seemed like a metaphor for infidelity, because
Mm.
the wife was cheating. That's what led to the ultimately led to the death of her son. And that's a huge spoiler alert in case you've never seen Cujo.
Yeah.
Because the other relationship that was there was the kind of country guy was going to go to town to cheat on his wife. You know what I mean? And these
Mm.
two couples are cheating, and through that infidelity, the beast of Cujo was able to be unleashed on an innocent victim. And that metaphor of infidelity seemed to have a much more, again, we were talking about subtext in one of the other episodes, is when people read stuff, it seems like sometimes they don't understand subtext and like what the metaphor of, there's a story here, but that
Yeah.
story is a representation of an idea of something else, and it's presented
Yeah.
in this way so that you're entertained by, if you just tell people infidelity is wrong, then people could go to the Bible for stories about adultery or whatever. They don't really get it in the same way as if you show a dog ripping a little kid to shreds or whatever, because he's rabid, and that rabid sexuality of that lustfulness, and I could be reading into it my own thing, but that's what I got from it, and that seemed to have more depth.
Sometimes I think too, if you tell a really entertaining story, it usually involves humanity.
Yeah,
Some human experience or feeling or universal truths about life. And
universal,
so
yeah.
people can read into it. So as I said, that one where I wrote a story which ended with the song
Hmm.
that we only got because it
Right,
was the
right,
cheapest song we could
right,
buy.
exactly, yeah.
Um, and somebody read into it. What they read was totally valid. It was
Sure.
a really valid reading, but not the intention of the episode.
Right,
Or
yeah.
other readings too that would have been valid. And
Right.
so I think anytime you write, we're talking about complexity. I think bottom line here is we start talking about one dimensional characters.
Hmm.
Once you add complexity and get away from that one dimensional storylines or characters,
Hmm.
you create things that people can read into, and everybody can read something different into it and
Hmm.
still be entertained because the whole thing was complex and entertaining. And that's why when somebody says, "Oh no, this was the theme of my movie," and somebody says, "I didn't see it at all. I thought the theme was blah blah blah,"
Hmm.
that could be perfectly valid. That could be that works as a theme. So the bottom line is keep your stories complex enough and human enough and authentic enough that people can read into it.
Hmm.
People enjoy that. They want to read into it. They want to interpret it. They want to be surprised. They want to constantly be engaged and moved and stimulated.
Right.
It's like a roller coaster.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of roller coasters, but when I was younger, I used to love them.
Hmm.
Then when you get older, you start going, "Oh, there goes my lunch." It's not as
Yeah.
much fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people want to be stimulated. Stimulation is it. Why do we go to a movie? You don't go to a movie to sit there and have somebody talk to you for 2 hours.
Hmm.
Go there for stimulation, and the stimulation can be horror. You
Hmm.
come out scared shitless, which again I don't get. And again, I see it as that genre is some wonderful horror things have been written. It's just not my cup of tea because I don't like walking out of a mirror out of a movie scared of my shadow
Right.
and
Yeah.
not wanting to take a shower because my
Hmm.
the images every time I close my eyes because I got so open is that somebody's going to stab me. It's
Hmm.
like I know it's not going to happen, but it creates ugly images. So I avoid horror films, but some of them are wonderful. I mean, they're
You know.
really smartly written, and they do stimulate the audience, so they're valid. They're just not valid for me as
Right.
the viewer who's going to pay the $18.
Hmm.
If I'm talking about a movie, not very many half-hour horror things.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think there's
Yeah.
ever
That's
been
true.
one, but
That's
half
interesting,
hours are
actually.
basically comedies, and that's what I've always written. But I don't want to write comedies that are just silly, obvious stuff like trying to get a mule up a stairwell because up a staircase because you weren't supposed to have the mule in the house
Hmm.
and somebody's at the front door and the back door, so you got to go up the stair. Okay, so you got now you head up against the mule's ass and you push
Hmm.
him up. Maybe it's funny to look at, but if there's no real story content except they finally get the mule to the top of the stairs, um, I just don't want to watch it. It just doesn't do anything for me. But it does some for some people, and it is stimulating. I mean, watching somebody push a mule up a stair case is probably a pretty funny thing. To
Yeah, because it's so
watch.
unexpected. Yeah, unexpected. But when you brought up the thing about the horror movie earlier, when we were talking about the complexity of evil characters, I actually thought about Freddy Krueger, and what makes Freddy Krueger more interesting versus Jason is Freddy Krueger has a wicked sense of humor. You know,
Mm,
he's funny, so he toys with his victims, and he's like, there's a cat and mouse type of thing, and whereas Jason, for whatever reason, just seems to be one of those like Olympic walkers who just walks
yeah.
faster than everybody who runs. I don't, I don't really,
Well,
and you hear his backstory or whatever, and so you're like, oh yeah, I guess like that's why he walks around for 80 years or whatever, smashing people to bits. But he's not as entertaining to me as the humor, the Robert London's characterization of Freddy Krueger, which I
yeah.
liked when I was younger.
But I really like I saw Friday the 13th, the first one, and I remember
Yeah.
the first scene where the girl is running from somebody we don't know who, and she gets up against a tree. And you see a knife go across her neck,
Hmm.
and it doesn't look like it did anything. And then a thin line of blood shows, and then
Hmm.
blood just comes pouring down.
Hmm.
And I was through with the movie at that point.
It was The
I
Exorcist for me.
Huh?
The
Oh, The
Exorcist.
Exorcist was another one like that.
Wow.
I just walk out of that movie going, I feel so terrible and I'm
Mhm.
scared. And I know
Mhm.
that none of it's real, but I have all these scary images in my head that
Mhm.
are going to haunt me for a long time. I'm going to, every time I shut my eyes or try and fall asleep or think of the movie again, it's going to haunt me.
Mhm.
I don't want that. I don't
Mhm.
want that. Life's hard enough for me. I want my
Mhm.
movies to make me feel better.
Yeah.
Darn it. That's darn it. I said, I'm even being,
But that's you know, that was the thing when I wanted to write, you know, because it's like, what do you? They say like write the genres that you love, you know, and so like eventually I was like, well, I like half-hour comedies. That's like I like comedies. I like film comedies, but film comedies, at least in this last few eras of film comedies, seem to be a lot more crass and like, you know, there's
yeah.
some really good ones, but it's a lot of Pratt jokes and stuff like that.
You know what I think happens with film comedies is they're just too long. I think that
Hmm.
comedies work better when they're short because you don't have
Seinfeld
to
said
do
the
as
same
big
thing.
a you don't have to do as big an event.
Hmm.
With a movie, you do a big event and you already know what the outcome, and now you're just kind of stalling for time because there's no
Hmm.
real strong story.
Hmm.
And so a half hour doesn't usually have real strong stories, but it has a significant story
Hmm.
and it's over in half an hour.
Yeah.
And so it works as comedy, but I've watched some comedies, like some romantic uh, comedies, some rom coms, and um, you just know everything's going to happen, and you find, let's just get to the end. Let's push this along because
Hmm.
I know all this stuff is just stalling that they're not going to get along now,
Hmm.
then they're going to get together. I want to see how they get together at the end. That's all I want to see. And then
Rom-coms especially because they're so formulaic, especially
uh,
nowadays. Yeah.
and other kinds are kind of gross and just go for the laughs, and I get bored with those too because there's no story to hang on to. And well, okay, that joke was funny. That joke was funny. That joke was funny. It's 2 hours of these kind of similar kinds of jokes. I'm just getting a little tired of joke, and I'm not engaged in the story at all. Those
Hmm.
don't work for me either, though. Some of them have been very successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is, you know, the the huge chasm between, you know, I guess a critically acclaimed, which doesn't mean much, you know, but you know, as a writer, having uh, an idea about what makes a good story versus the audience reactions to things that you probably wouldn't, you know, recommend to a friend. You know what I mean? So, like Jackass, I thought was interesting, um, but I was surprised that it had such longevity because the
Yeah,
early Jackass stuff had really clever skits, you know, and then eventually it just became stunts that were pretty gross, you know, and
yeah.
some of that's really entertaining. I would still watch it, you know, and of course I'm probably like a little bit, you know, I'm much more familiar with those people having known some of those guys through skateboarding and everything. So, you know, it's different watching it, but you know, I just was surprised that the world accepted it so much. But they also, you know, physical comedy is probably more translatable to people of different cultures than, you know, nuanced jokes like the squid and the whale, or you know, like a sense of
Yeah.
humor of the squid and the whale or something like that, which
Uh-huh.
is, you know, very subtle, you know, subtle. And that's the thing about speaking about Ozark is Justin Bateman has such a very subtle way about him.
Mm.
You know, it's almost like you're watching somebody do nothing. You know what I mean? But
Hmm.
he really pulls you in,
He does,
and
yeah.
it's a very he has a skill. But if you see him in Arrested Development, it's a slightly it's a very different type of character, but he still has that Justin Bateman sensibility. You know, where he's like, you know, much more grounded than the people around him. But I thought Arrested Development was very zany and very off the wall, but you know, really entertaining. I really like that show as well. You know, I thought that was
I think
fantastic.
somebody, if you're gonna do a comedy like that where it's zany, you just gotta keep people laughing their asses off. They gotta
Hmm.
be laughing out loud constantly because there's no story really that you care about. But
Hmm.
there was a story you cared about, but except it was so zany, you just couldn't get much of feeling that it really mattered much. But they they just really were intensely writing that thing.
Hmm.
Lots of jokes, lots of weird twists, and those things kept together. If you are capable of doing that, you can almost write a story that is one dimensional if you can keep up the laughs. But
Hmm.
as a writer, it's gonna burn you out. Those guys get burned out, and they just I don't know. I think you're better off with a strong story, and you add your comedy and your humor to a strong story rather than just trying to survive on the jokes. I
Hmm.
just don't think in the long run more shows fail that try that than succeed by far.
Hmm.
Almost everything that tries to be all jokey or tries to have a bad guy in the lead fail. And some
Hmm.
every once in a while one comes along and succeeds because somebody just found a way to do it. They just found that angle, that technique or something that made it work.
Hmm.
But it's a hard way to go. You're much smarter, more likely to succeed if you tell really good stories. And I love good stories. And
Hmm.
I'm just saying I like my good stories to be comedies, but I still want them to have a really strong good story. Now I've seen things like some of Stephen King's stuff. Some of it really works well on screen, some of it doesn't. Um, and those are horror of sort. They're not as horror as some horror because they're
Hmm.
mostly psychological horror.
Yeah, thriller,
Um,
suspense. Yeah.
and I appreciate those too, but I still don't. It's just maybe I'm simplistic in that way. As I said again, when I pay my $18 or my $50 when I'm all done, I want to I want to walk out of that movie feeling like I want to go get ice cream. Like I'm
Hmm.
feeling good. I don't want to walk out of the movie feeling shitty or scared.
Hmm.
I just don't want to. I'm scared and feeling shitty enough without having a movie add to that. I want my movies to make me feel better.
Yeah, I was saying to my wife, like, if there's a drama on, like, maybe I'll pick up a show that I stopped watching just so I can kind of see the rest of it. But, like I didn't pick up The Sopranos for like a decade or something because, you know, 9/11 happened and, I kind of lost touch with the show or whatever. And so I didn't see the finale for a long time. But um, I will watch a comedy over and over and over again. I've seen every episode of The Office, British and American versions, and I like the difference of the two different versions.
Uh,
I've seen every episode multiple times. I've seen the Parks and Recs multiple. I'll keep
yeah,
coming back to
yeah,
these shows. But if it's like Game of Thrones, if I'm disappointed by season 8, and I know where it's going to end, I don't want to go back. I'm not that, even though I think it's fantastic writing, very suspenseful, very interesting. I won't rewatch those shows. I'll watch a comedy over and over and over again. And also,
yeah.
I will not want to watch a movie because it's going to take up too much of my time, but I'll binge watch 7 episodes or 8 episodes in a row of some
Yeah.
comedy that I like.
But the thing with that is that you can just walk away from it at any time.
Hmm.
You didn't intend to binge watch 8 hours worth of television, but I don't know. I mean, what we keep saying is bottom line is, and that is, are you engaging your audience in a way
Right.
that you feel entertained? And if they walk away scared and they paid their money and they wanted to be scared, then you did your job. If they
Hmm.
walk away feeling down and depressed about it, and that's what they expected and that's what they wanted, then you did your job.
Hmm.
I'm just not that person. I don't want that when I go to the theater, but I'm open minded enough to know there've been some wonderful, really smart, well written horror films and thrillers and all sorts that I just don't personally want to put myself through. I just don't want to do it.
Hmm.
That's why I say I quit going on roller coasters because I don't know. Maybe it's because I just my attitude just changed a little bit. The roller coasters to me scare the shit out of me when they're the best. The ones that are the best are the ones that really scare you when you get to the top and you go, oh man, oh shit, and boom, and
Yeah.
you go down and you drop out and you feel your stomach go up in your throat and all that. And I when it's all over and you're standing there and you're laughing because
You
you made
survived.
and you survived, and then you're going, do you want to do that a second time? No, I don't want to go back up there. I don't want to do that. I wrote a story one time, a taxi where Alex jumps out of an airplane.
Hmm.
He wanted to skydive, and he jumps out. And when he describes it to everybody, he describes it in such a beautiful way that it sounds wonderful. And then somebody says, "So when are you going to jump again?" He says, "Never." That's the
Yeah.
last line of it. Never. So that's how I feel about horror films and stuff. If I sit through one, I probably enjoy the whole process. Do I
Hmm.
want to do it again? No.
Yeah.
Don't. Do I want to go on roller coasters anymore? I just don't. They make me feel too crappy in the process, and then so you feel so great when you survived it, but I just don't want to do them a second time. I just not me.
Hmm.
So I have people learn a lot about me and say, well, maybe I don't even want maybe Ken's, but I'm not prejudiced against these other kinds of genres.
Hmm.
I see the value in them, and they help make comedy work. Because if everything was a comedy, people would be bored to death of comedy. Somebody's got to write the horror and the thrillers and the straight dramas. Otherwise, so whatever. But this is really interesting, but I got to go now.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I was gonna bring up Seinfeld because everybody says, "Oh, it's a show about nothing," which it actually isn't a show about
it's not a
nothing.
show about that.
You
He
know.
said it was a show about nothing. You know what Seinfeld started? He was a stand-up comic. I don't think
Hmm.
he understood what he was doing.
Hmm.
He made the first shows were not very good, if you remember,
Yeah, it took
and then
three
it got
seasons for them,
better.
and that's why you shouldn't cancel the show so early.
Right. And
Yeah.
he said this show is about nothing, and it was not about nothing. And he said nobody in a show ever. He did that thing about nobody has a good bone in their body. Nobody ever does anything except for a selfish reason.
Hmm.
And he didn't hold to that entirely either.
Hmm.
The story can never be about anything was not true because when they seem to be about nothing, they were about something. He did a show about everybody not masturbating
Hmm.
because uh, they were going to see how long they could go.
Hmm.
There was something. There's more than he thought. That it's not about nothing. It's not about. It's about willpower. It's about prejudice against certain things. That masturbation is bad, and
Hmm.
somebody else to um, I forget who it was who masturbates right away.
Kramer.
Kramer does, yeah.
Yeah.
Him, it was a great thing. It was a way of releasing tension that otherwise could get him in trouble,
Hmm.
uh, or make him feel bad, or not make him unable to sleep. So there was something there. It was about is masturbation a bad thing? Is
Hmm.
masturbation something to be ashamed of? Um,
I think it was just a show about nothing, which is a good way of saying at that time it's not a show about moralization or these type of lessons that you should learn. And the other thing I was going to say about Seinfeld, and I know you got to go, but I was going to bring up about Seinfeld is when you talk about joke, not only is it not a show about nothing, there's a story there, and it's not joke. There's a pacing to it. Otherwise, you just watch him do stand up, which is different,
and his
and that,
stand up, he eventually quit the stand up. Remember, he used to stand up in the
yeah.
beginning and
Hmm.
stand up at the end. They
Yeah.
took them both out because
Yeah.
nobody liked the stand up. Everybody
Yeah.
wanted the story, and the stories were really the things George went through, all the
Where he got the
struggles and the
golf ball out
ups
of
and
the
the downs.
blowhole and everything.
Yeah,
He was an
those are
architect.
stories, and those are about something. They're
Yeah.
about denial. It turns out not to be true,
Hmm.
and yes, they were always about something.
Yeah.
There was the only things that were about nothing were the stand up that he did at the beginning and the end, in which people got tired of.
It's like people kind of latched on to the story about nothing so that they could be lazy about their writing. When it's like, no, that's not. You just hurt. You're hearing it wrong. You know what I mean? You're taking it out of context. It's not a story about or a show about nothing. It's just each story is a self-contained thing that you know each character has an arc throughout the
Yeah.
seasons, throughout the stories. And so yeah, that's just a misconception. So it made
And
me think
one of
about
the
that.
things he used to do great that isn't done very often. He always had three or four stories in every episode,
Right. It's
and they
hard to
all
do.
would dovetail.
Hmm.
They would all come together and be resolved almost with dependent on one another for the resolution. They dovetailed like nobody does. Usually somebody does, say you do four stories. Most people don't do four stories. Maybe you do three stories.
Which is crazy
Usually
hard.
two of them end, and then the main one ends last.
Yeah, yeah, little C story.
Sometimes they overlap, but it was very consistent very often that they would all resolve together in the last scene, or
Hmm.
they wouldn't be independent stories that were all taking place with the same character. They were stories that intertwined with one another and at the end resolved together. So
Right.
it was a real craft, and that was Larry David, I believe, who was doing that.
Hmm.
I think Seinfeld's a funny guy, but I think Larry David was the one who was making the stories work.
I think, well, he
Um,
left after the third season or something like that. So the
Larry
rest of the
David.
seasons, yeah. So the rest of those seasons, some of the best written seasons, or no, no, not after the third season. I can't remember when he left, but it was earlier rather than later. And so some of those were Jerry Seinfeld writing those really well crafted stories. And
Well,
and shelving
but
some of that stand-up mentality
yeah,
and
so
yeah.
so then Jerry learned from that. I didn't know that Jerry was, I didn't know that Jerry was doing that at the end. I give Jerry credit for that then. The stand up are isolated jokes and they work in a nightclub. They
Mhm.
don't work in a show. And he found that out when he tried to make that a big part of his show and it didn't work.
And also the interesting thing too is like it's the perspective of the characters. You know, I talked about Keats a lot about, you know, a character has a perspective. That's what makes them funny. George Costanza's
Mm,
perspective was funny. And so that's how you know that there's a difference between, not that Seinfeld doesn't have a perspective when he's doing stand up, but the show isn't joke, 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 joke because, you know, Jerry Seinfeld's a good comedy writer and he's a good stand up. He knew how to nail in Elaine has a perspective, Kramer has a perspective, Jerry has a perspective, Newman has they all have a very focused. So to say like they're very self-centered people is only part of the story really, because if they weren't self-centered people, you wouldn't get their unique personalities. And so George Costanza blows up at the smallest things. You know, he's a commedia dell'arte type of character. And so, but that's because his perspective, he over dramatizes these little moments, you know, which is also a good
yeah.
thing for comedy to do, but just very fascinating, you know, that you know, there's a lot of misconceptions about the Seinfeld, you know, era of comedy, TV comedy. So I always think
Yeah,
about that
you
kind of
even think
stuff.
about the one you mentioned about the blowhole where
Hmm.
the whale had a golf ball stuck in his blowhole.
Yeah.
Um, that was where they intertwine. I mean, he did a story that looked like it was about nothing
Hmm.
with Kramer hitting golf balls into the ocean,
Hmm.
and then it becomes critical in the resolution of George's story.
That's high skill. That's high skill right there. You know, that's like hard to emulate, you know, and have it work so well, you know. And plus
Yeah.
the actors are doing such an impeccable job of breathing
Yes.
life into those characters. But yeah, that's
And there is a story there. It's not about nothing because George, with all his bullshitting,
hmm
ends up having a situation where it looks like he's going. You know,
he's a
he's going to
marine
get.
biologist. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Totally.
there's a lesson there about, you know, what do you know, when you lie, your lie gets worse and worse and worse, and
Right.
in that one, he pulls the golf ball and saves the whale, and then
hmm
she loves him for it, right? Was it?
Yeah, because you know the whale is beached, and she goes, and somebody goes, is there a marine biologist
Oh,
around? And of course he's been lying the whole time about being a marine
right, right,
biologist. So
right, right.
she looks to him, and then he's like, well, you know, I got to roll up my sleeves and, you know, carry out this next version of the lie. And then when he pulls out that Titleist, you know what I mean? Then Kramer, you know, when they're sitting there at the diner, you know, Kramer's like, that's my ball, you know. And so he had caused this whole uh,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
conundrum. You know, that's very fast. That's, I mean, I'm sure we could just talk, you know,
I
about
know, but
Seinfeld
that's
and
all.
stuff, but
There's a lot of story there.
yeah.
There's about coincidence. There's about life is what happens while you're making other plans, which
Yes.
was, um, yeah, there was a lot of story there.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so next, you know, wow, we're only at 2 hours, so we should probably wrap this one up. This is definitely another great episode, another great talk.
Yeah, and if you missed the beginning, that's when we told you how to always get women
Mhm.
100% guaranteed, but you missed that part, you'll have to watch the show and catch it later.
Yeah, and also how to be super wealthy. I mean, it's an easy thing to do, and we lay it out step by step. So definitely
Yeah,
tune in for
so
that.
anything basically we're going to cover everything you need to know, but in the meantime, we're going to talk a lot about us.
Yeah.
So,
The
so you
most
gotta listen
interesting.
to
Definitely not a story about nothing, you know.
you gotta listen to the whole thing so you catch those gems about how to make your life better, which is yeah, how to make a lot of money. That was a great idea you had about making money easily.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try it myself. So
I liked, you know, like when Elon came to me and he said, you know, how do we do this? And I laid out, you know, a simple plan for him. Just stick to
yeah,
these
yeah,
principles. It works for anybody.
I
It's
know. And we
duplicatable.
do the fact that we do this podcast just because we love people so much.
Yeah.
We want to share all these things with them. So
People need to learn, you know, and I'm here to
people
help.
need people need to learn, but that's why it's not entertaining if we just teach you. The same thing we were
Yeah.
talking about with the shows, if we just give you the
Exactly.
lessons.
Yeah, we can't just give it to you. You have to, you know, you have to have some kind of initiative. You got to search for it. You know,
Yeah.
it's also I was going to say Well, this is we'll talk about this next time. I won't drag into it. But I did want to, when you bring up Taxi, we haven't really talked too much about what it's like to work with Andy Kaufman. One of the comedy
Oh yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
you know uh, monsters out there. So
Yeah, Andy
we could get to
Kaufman
that.
was really interesting guy. There was always a debate about whether he was crazy or a genius or a crazy genius,
Right.
or maybe just crazy.
Hmm.
Well, he was definitely he had some really he thought of things that people just didn't think of, and a lot of people didn't think they were entertaining, but they always got people engaged, and it was entertaining. But people wouldn't give him credit really for that skill. He just didn't. I think I told you he wanted to do Taxi in the first. He wanted us to do 5 minutes of Taxi, where everybody's just doing what taxi drivers do while they're waiting for their taxi. They just sit around reading the newspaper, scratching their butt, eating a sandwich, and nobody talking to each other. Everybody just doing stuff, or if they do talk, just minor nothing talk. He just wanted 5 minutes of boredom.
Hmm.
He wanted to start our episode out with 5 minutes of boredom, which is what would be in a real cab company. Jim Brooks used to say Andy Kaufman's a genius. He's one of the people who used to say Andy Kaufman was a genius. A lot of other people said, "Oh, he's just a silly guy."
Hmm.
Uh, Jim used to say he was a genius, but when he went to Jim and said, "Jim, this is people will remember this. If Tag's already a hit,
Hmm.
we were in our fourth season, so we're already a big hit. Nobody's going to turn the channel. They're just going to say, well, what's going on here?" And they'll be fascinated by 5 minutes of nothing happening.
Hmm.
I think that was a genius moment, and Jim didn't see that. Jim laughed at him like he was kidding, and Andy said, "I'm deadly serious." And Jim said, "No, we're not going to do that." And he never did it. But he called the guy genius, and then wouldn't do one of his genius ideas, which I think that was. People would have remembered that episode. It is one they would have talked about for as long as Taxi was on, and many long after.
Yeah,
Remember
it's a
when that episode
visionary.
started out and people walk in and they sit down and you think somebody's going to say something funny to somebody else, and all he does is ask him if he'll pass the salt, and he passes the salt, and he salts his thing and eats it, and you're looking for the punchline to that, and there's no punchline to that. Somebody else walks by in the background and picks something up off the floor and then walks by, and
It honestly sounds cool just hearing, like that could have been, because it would have, it would have solidified a little bit of true life to the, otherwise
yeah.
sitcom style comedy,
It would have been a great moment. So it was a genius moment because he was thinking in a way nobody else was thinking,
Hmm.
and it was right. It was right on the money. And Jim wouldn't do it. Jim said
Kind of
no.
fearless, that's a fearless way of using the box to, like, actually entertain, but in a different way.
Do you remember how the show ended? It always ended with the show be over, and then there'd be the show logo would be "Good night, Mr. Walters," and Mr. Walters would go and
Hmm.
walk out.
Yeah.
Well, Sam Simon and I went on the very last episode, rewrote that. So she's "Good night, Mr. Walters," and he goes, and he turns back and says, "You want to get a drink?" She's, "Oh, Mr. Walters," and they go out together.
Yeah,
Uh
that's cool.
they
Yeah,
they
that's like,
didn't shoot that. They didn't want to shoot that.
oh, really?
Mm.
Yeah, so it's like like the haiku, it's like people don't want to break the rules, like once you have a haiku format set up, they don't want you to, like, destroy that format. Which is, it's a respect for the format, I get it, but television was, it has so many possibilities that people don't play out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's I think today you're more apt to be able to do those things. But now today, if somebody did that Andy Kaufman thing, it would still work great.
Yeah.
Pick a show that usually ends up with a lot of interesting, amusing banter, and before the main story starts, and
Hmm.
instead of having all that interesting, wonderful banter, do what people really do. They're just doing boring shit, which is what life really mostly is,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
people
true.
would start laughing. Andy Kaufman did he rented Carnegie Hall and for an Andy Kaufman show. And so it sold out.
Hmm.
This was the height of his career on Taxi, so he was really well known. And then when people showed up, I think I told you this, Airto, I think I told you that he started reading Moby Dick. I think it was Moby Dick. It might have been War and
I
Peace. It
think
was
it was
something.
Great Gatsby, I think.
Oh, it was Great Gatsby. And
Yeah.
it was one of those long uh, classical novels. And he started reading it, and at first, people, Why is he reading that? What's the punchline? And he kept reading it, reading it, reading. People realized he's just going to keep reading it. People started laughing.
Hmm.
And I think they would have laughed at that 5 minutes of nothing happening in Taxi too when they realized it was our joke.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
the joke. But Andy carries things too far is his trademark. And so he read the whole book
yeah,
or as much as he could till everybody was gone except for a handful of people who stayed, who it was clear were never going to leave. They were going to let him read the whole book.
yeah,
And when it was down to just a handful of people, he had a bus out in the back and he took them all out for a meal. He paid for cookies and milk, not a big deal, but cookies and milk somewhere where they had dessert.
yeah.
Uh, he knew he would lose almost his entire audience, and whoever stayed, he was going to reward them by personally taking them out uh, for a snack.
That's the
That's
fearlessness, though. Yeah,
that's genius. That's
yeah,
genius. And people said no, he went too far because people laughed at the joke of him reading the book, and once they were laughed out and they started getting bored, and a few people started shifting their seat and leaving, then he should have started doing his material. He didn't. He kept. He was going to do it until everybody left who was going to leave.
committed. He was committed to it.
Yeah.
And that's also part of pushing the genre. And you hear a lot of stand-up comedians talking about how like they master the bomb. Like they're out there, they're bombing, and they get comfortable with that bombing. There's a really great clip you should, if you ever check it out, of Bill Bill Burr. Stand up Bill Burr. He's bombing in this one show, and he is bombing really bad. And he just manages to like slowly grind the gears and bring the audience back to his
Oh,
side.
really?
Yeah, but he just stayed in that bombing pocket and didn't care, didn't give a shit. And
Yeah.
eventually it worked for him. That's also shows a level of mastery where you're not so at the behest of the audience that you're gonna go wherever they decide.
Yeah,
It's like
some
no,
people are
you're the in
funnier.
control.
Some people are funnier bombing. Some people,
Hmm.
on the Tonight Show, Johnny Carson used to bomb a lot with some of his stuff, and his expressions at jokes that didn't work, and his attitude and his comebacks for things that didn't work were part of his best stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you got to be fearless, because it is about entertaining, like we've been talking about in this show. And it's like, you don't always, if you can't sometimes entertain in the right way if you let the audience dictate where you're gonna go, as because then you're not taking them to new places, you're just giving them
Yeah,
what they expect, but not in an unexpected way,
yeah.
so
But those two moments from Taxi would have made Taxi memorable. Maybe would have extended the length of Taxi's uh, followers because that would have been a great moment. Those 5 minutes and ending that logo, changing that logo. I think it was. So she says, "Good night, Mr. Walters." He goes, I think she's the one who says, "Mr. Walters," and he goes, and that's really, what? You just broke the thing, Mr. Walters. And he turns. She says, "You want to get a drink?" I think she asks him, and he says, "All right," or whatever he said. I don't remember what it was. She goes, "Oh, Mr. Walters," and she goes running after him. And
mhm.
it was a schmaltzy kind of ending, which was the opposite of what we had always done, which was that he's just a grumpy guy, Mr. Walters, and doesn't relate to anybody. Is to have them walk off together seemed to me a wonderful moment. We never got to do it.
But when you set up and when you break an expectation like that, I could see the kind of danger in a way, because then you're going to be expected to do something different every
Well,
time.
no, it was the last episode.
Yeah, yeah. But I meant with the thing also too with Andy Kaufman's like
Oh
idea of
yeah,
doing the sitting there quietly and just going through
yeah.
the
I think you could
paces.
only do that one time. I think it was a one-time joke, and everybody say, "Oh man, they just did this one great thing." You can't repeat that. I mean, if every week you or many weeks you start out with them doing nothing. Well, now I'm thinking about it. Might be funny stuff. Every once in a while, you shake up your audience. Every once in a while, you have them where nothing happens, and they
Hmm.
never know. They're waiting. Oh man, they're doing that to us again. That could be funny. They're
Yeah,
doing
could you
that to us.
imagine the pressure it would put on the writers to like have to condense the story even more? You're
Yeah,
chopping off like 5 pages of just them sitting there.
yeah, that's true. But I don't know. It seems like it's fun. Being inventive
Oh,
is a
sure.
fun part of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would have been awesome to see. You know what I mean? And definitely like for the historical idea of pushing TV, and like you said, now you could do something like that, but pushing the genre so much more. Being a little bit more daring. That would have been
I
cool to
guarantee
watch.
you, people they talk about buzz scenes and where people talk about it.
Hmm.
Those both would have been people would have been talking about both of those,
Yeah, yeah,
and they would have helped the series. And people were afraid to do them.
yeah. Fear. Gotta overcome it to be an
Yeah,
artist.
But especially when what I understand, Jim would say, Andy's a genius. You know, the thing where he's wrestling women, which made everybody hate him for that. Andy knew he was playing his audience, and his audience knew he was, and they loved hating him for the
Hmm.
wrestling women. And he was so obnoxious in it, and it was great that he did
Hmm.
that. And then Jim wouldn't do his 5 minute, his pitch about 5 minutes of nothing.
Maybe he respected his genius, but he's like, I have my own genius, and we're gonna sit in this genius for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't tell Andy. They wanted Andy to be a regular on the show, and Andy said, "No, I'll only do half the episodes every season."
Hmm.
So it was Andy. Andy was in every other episode, and people would say, "Well, gee, he was so funny. Why didn't you have him in more episodes?" He didn't want to be in more episodes. He didn't care about the money. Who does that? You're offered this huge paycheck. And he's saying, "I'll take half of that because I only want to be in half of the episodes."
But it's like
Andy
that
was
thing though,
remarkable.
where he did that Great Gatsby, novel reading, is because he was trying to break away from that Locke character, where he was like, he felt, I watched these documentaries about him where it seemed like he felt like, once you become, stuck in that mode, you're
Yeah,
that guy forever, and
yeah.
and especially in television, you could get not only typecast, but just the audience always expecting, they wanted him to keep doing the accent and, thank you very much or whatever, and like that doesn't evolve him as an artist, and I could see the danger and falling into that and getting
Well,
comfortable.
you look at Danny DeVito, and Danny DeVito, even when he's played some romantic comedy things, and he played something with Schwarzenegger, and he still was always the Schwarzenegger one. I don't think he was. Even when he did
Yeah,
play,
no, and Twins, he was definitely like a little
he was the
curmudgeon-y
good
kind
guy.
of
Yeah,
dude.
yeah. But in most of his others, he always played the same version, a different version of Louis De Palma. You know, a watered down version or a different version of the kind of angry, mean guy, kind
Right,
of.
right.
And so you can get typecast, and that's a terrible thing. So
Yeah, especially if you have range, if you're in a bit, if you have a lot of ability, you know.
yeah, yeah,
It's kind of like the Walter White, the actor. Of course, I'm gonna forget his name, but when he was in Malcolm in the Middle, he's kind of like an affable,
oh
middle
yeah,
of the
yeah,
road
yeah.
kind of guy. You know what I mean? So when you see him in the beginning of Breaking Bad, he's still that kind of guy. You know what I mean? And
Uh-huh.
then he shifted his whole career by doing that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He
Pretty
did.
powerful
So
stuff.
yeah.
But
All
I
right,
guess we
so
could wrap it
I
up.
gotta go. So we're gonna
Yeah.
wrap this up, and we're going to say to everybody who's been watching, I've got nothing to say.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday! There's got to
Happy
be
birthday,
somebody out
everyone.
there. Somebody out there's having a birthday today. Good one. I like that.
Yeah, and they're
Mark
probably
Walker.
alone right now, and we're just giving them a
We're
little bit
saying
of help.
happy
Happy birthday,
birthday to
that
Bob.
person, buddy. Yeah,
There's Bob out there somewhere. It
yeah,
was Bob. This was all for you.
yeah.